Agora eu escuto o mico e o passarinho.
Mico aí, aqui não tem.
Tô escutando o mico aqui desse lado de cá.
O passarinho também deve estar aí, porque aqui eu não escutei nada.
Boa tarde a todos e todas.
Good afternoon to
Buenas
all.
tardes a todos que estão conosco aqui.
Good
afternoon, you
to all
all.
with us.
Obrigado muito pela participação de todos e todas vocês. Estamos imensamente felizes de contar com a presença de cada um e de cada uma nessa iniciativa que tem como principal objetivo proporcionar discussões, proporcionar o compartilhamento de experiências, não só aqui no Brasil, mas estendendo fronteiras, indo para além do nosso país e levando também conhecimento, compartilhando práticas com vários países da América Latina e do Caribe. Eu sou Sidney Vasconcelos, oficial de educação no escritório do UNICEF em Manaus e pertenço à equipe de educação do UNICEF no Brasil. E nós temos, com esse seminário, o grande objetivo de fazer de fato com que muito conhecimento, muitas experiências exitosas possam ser compartilhadas e que várias dessas experiências possam influenciar positivamente na construção de trajetórias de sucesso escolar para cada menino e cada menina. Esperamos proporcionar a todos os participantes que estão aqui conosco hoje a oportunidade de conhecer, de aprender, de se inspirar e, de fato, de fazer com que as políticas públicas educacionais elas possam chegar a cada criança, a cada adolescente com qualidade, respeitando suas especificidades e, de fato, garantindo os seus direitos. Durante esses 3 dias de evento, estamos começando hoje o nosso Seminário Internacional Trajetórias de Sucesso Escolar e durante essa terça, a quarta e a quinta-feira dessa semana, vamos trazer para compartilhar com vocês várias experiências do Brasil e de outros países da América Latina e do Caribe. É com muito prazer que estamos aqui proporcionando essas oficinas, esses momentos de discussão, esses painéis, para que, de fato, cada um e cada uma de vocês possa compartilhar também a experiência local, uma experiência regional, de âmbito nacional, que faz com que cada trajetória escolar seja, de fato, de sucesso. Então, é pensando nisso que o UNICEF, em parceria com a Flaxo Brasil e com o apoio da Porcos, está trazendo, a partir de hoje, para esses próximos 3 dias, o Seminário Internacional Trajetórias de Sucesso Escolar. Então, queria, mais uma vez, agradecer a cada um e cada uma de todos os estados brasileiros que estão conosco, de todos os países da nossa região da América Latina e Caribe que estão nos acompanhando, e dizer que vocês são parte muito importante na garantia do direito à educação de cada menino e cada menina. Esteja aqui um professor, uma professora, um diretor, uma diretora escolar, um gestor ou gestora municipal, um técnico de uma secretaria de educação, um representante, por exemplo, de uma organização da sociedade civil, de um parceiro
someone
do
from the
setor
civil
privado,
society, a partner from
vocês
the
têm muita
private
importância e uma responsabilidade grande
part.
quando se colocam de fato
You
nesse
all have
espaço
a great
de
responsibility
contribuir para a qualidade
when
da
you put
educação,
yourselves in
não só
that
no nosso país
position
Brasil,
to
mas em
contribute
todos esses
for
países que
education,
estão
not
aqui
just in
conosco,
Brazil, but
a partir
also
de
in
hoje,
the other
discutindo
countries with
várias
us.
dessas experiências
As of today,
exitosas.
discussing many
Então,
successful
já já eu voltarei
stories.
aqui para
I will be
compartilhar
back
pouco
very
mais com
soon
vocês
to share a bit
essa
more
agenda
with
do que
you
teremos
this
nesses 3
agenda
dias.
of what we'll
Possam
consider
ficar
during the 3
certos e
days.
certas de que essa
And you can
agenda
be
foi
certain
pensada
that
e
the
vem sendo
agenda
pensada
has
há mais
been
de um
well
ano para que
thought
de fato
out
possa responder às
to
demandas locais, para que possa responder de
provide a
fato
response
e,
to
com certeza,
local
reconhecer
demands
tudo que
and
vem sendo
local
feito de
needs,
muito
and also
importante
to
em
acknowledge
cada lugar
everything
do
that has
Brasil, em
been
cada um
done
desses países que
successfully
estão aqui
in
conosco a
Brazil
partir
and
de
in other
hoje. É
countries
muito
who are
importante a
today
gente
with us.
lembrar também
É
que quando
important to
estamos
note
falando de
as well that
trajetórias
as
de
we
sucesso
talk
escolar,
about
estamos falando
successful school
exatamente de
trajectories,
como
we're
proporcionar
talking about
essa
how to
educação
provide
com um
this
olhar para as
education
suas especificidades de
and
cada povo, para
take
um
into account
olhar
the
das tradições,
specificities of
para o
each
conhecimento
people,
que esses
take into
meninos e
account
meninas
traditions, and
têm e trazem consigo em
also
suas
take into
vidas.
account the
E
knowledge
então, para que a
the
gente
young
possa
boys and girls
receber as
have
boas-vindas
and bring to school.
de todas essas
So
organizações que
we
têm
welcome
feito
all
parte
these
da
organizations
organização desse seminário,
that are
eu
part
queria
of
chamar
the
algumas
organization of
pessoas
this
que estão
seminar.
aqui também
I would
com
like
muita
to
alegria, muito prazer, para compartilhar com vocês
very
algumas falas
gladly
iniciais que
bring
correspondem
someone to the
exatamente
floor,
ao que cada uma
some
dessas
people to the floor
organizações, ao que
to
cada uma dessas lideranças
say
pensam sobre a
what each of
educação e o
these
trabalho e a
leaderships
importância
think
desse
about
seminário
work
para o que a
and
gente
about the
quer
importance of
continuar
this
fazendo
seminar,
e
so
fazer
as
ainda
to
mais
allow us to continue doing what we're
propenso
doing,
a levar e a
and even
proporcionar
more
essas
so
trajetórias
to
escolares de
promote
sucesso.
successful school
Primeiramente, queria também
trajectories.
dizer que há cerca
I
de
would
ano
also
e meio,
like to
quando
say that
começamos a
about a year and a
pensar
half
nesse
ago,
seminário,
when we started
pensamos fazê-lo
thinking
de
about the
forma
seminar,
presencial.
we wanted to do
Então,
it
a pandemia
in person.
veio e
A
nos
pandemic
colocou, de
came
fato, em situações
and
inéditas
cornered
até então.
us,
Então, por isso,
putting
estamos
us in
hoje
situations we
realizando
have never
de maneira
imagined we
online,
would be. So
inteiramente
we're doing
online,
this
em que cada da
completely
sua casa,
online,
cada do seu
everyone from
lugar de
their own
trabalho,
home or
pode com
from their own
segurança participar. E eu acredito que até
place
dessa
of
forma
work,
nós estamos
and we're
oportunizando
collaborating this way,
cada pessoa aqui presente
giving
a se
the
fazer de
opportunity
fato presente por
to
meio dessa
everyone
conexão
to be
internet. Eu
present
acredito
through the
que,
internet.
por mais que seja
I truly
desafiador
believe that,
estarmos
however
realizando
challenging
essa
it may
iniciativa
be,
de forma inteiramente
doing
online, eu acho
this
que ela consegue
online
ser ainda assim mais
seminar,
inclusiva do que
we are
ela seria se
promoting
estivéssemos fazendo
inclusiveness
presencial.
even
E
more
por falar
so
em
than
inclusão,
if it were
queria relembrar a todos e todas que esse seminário, nos seus 3
live
dias,
presence of
estará
each one of
sendo
us.
transmitido por todo
The
seu
seminar is going to
percurso
be
no nosso
transmitted
canal do UNICEF no Brasil
through
no
our
YouTube, nos
YouTube
idiomas
UNICEF channel
português,
in Brazil, in
inglês,
Portuguese, in
espanhol,
English, in
com também
Spanish,
tradução
and
simultânea para
also
Libras
simultaneously
português, a nossa língua
translated to
brasileira de
the
sinais,
Brazilian
e
Sign
ainda
Language,
com
and
audiodescrição
also
no
with
idioma português.
the
Então,
audio
pensar em
description
trajetórias de
in
sucesso
Portuguese.
escolar é pensar também em
So when we
inclusão.
think in
Então, queria
successful school
agora passar a
trajectories, we have to
palavra
think
para a
inclusion as
nossa
well.
representante
Now
do
let's give the
UNICEF no
floor to our
Brasil, Florence
representative
Bauer,
of
que em
UNICEF in
seguida
Brazil,
compartilhará
Florence
também
Bauer, who
o
next
nosso palco
will
virtual hoje
share
com
our virtual
algumas
stage
autoridades, com
with
algumas
some
lideranças, como eu falei,
officials,
das
some
organizações que estão
leadership
conosco, contribuindo para a garantia desses direitos e para a
individuals who are
realização
here to
dessa
ensure the rights to
iniciativa.
education
Estaremos,
and to contribute
juntamente
with this
com Florence,
initiative.
com o
We
nosso
will be with
diretor
Florence,
adjunto de
with
programas
our
nível
Deputy Regional
regional,
Director,
o senhor
Regional
Yusuf,
Office,
e
Mr.
também teremos,
Yusuf.
representando a
We will
Flaxo
also have,
Brasil como
representing Flaxo
co-realizadora
Brazil
desse nosso
as a
encontro, desse
co-sponsor
nosso
of
seminário,
this
a senhora
seminar,
Salete Valezan, e também
Salete
representando
Valizan,
a Portus
and also
na América
representing
Latina, a
Portuguese
senhora
in
Mirella
Latin
Sandrini,
America,
diretora
Mirella
regional.
Sandrini,
Então,
Regional
Florence, um
Director.
prazer que eu passo a palavra
So
para
Florence,
você. Obrigado.
the floor is yours.
Obrigada, muito obrigada.
Thank you
Sidney.
very much. Thank you very
Saudando
much,
todo mundo.
Sidney.
Grande prazer estar aqui
It is
junto
a
com
great
vocês
pleasure to
para a
be here
abertura do
with you
Seminário
to open
Internacional
this
de Trajetória e
international
Sucesso Escolar.
seminary
Queria agradecer ao
on
nosso
school
escritório regional do
trajectories.
UNICEF, através
I would
do
like to
diretor
thank
adjunto
our
Yusuf, que está com a gente, por nos
UNICEF's
ajudar a
local
transformar
office
essa
to
ideia de
help us transform
seminário
the idea
inicialmente
of
nacional
the
no
seminar
Seminário
that was initially
Internacional para a
just thought
América
of a
Latina e
national one,
Caribe. Queria
and we
agradecer também os
transformed
nossos
it
grandes
into an
parceiros, a
international one for Latin
Salete,
American.
da
I'd like to
diretora da
thank
Flaxo, e a
Salete,
Mirelle,
Flaxo
diretora
Director,
da
and Mirella,
Portuguese para a América
Director
Latina,
for
que
Latin
estão
America
aqui
for Portuguese, who are
para
also
essa
with us
abertura, para esse
in this
seminário.
opening
A
of the
prevenção do
seminar.
fracasso escolar é uma das grandes
To
prioridades que o UNICEF Brasil
prevent
vem
school
trabalhando
failure
faz
is
vários
something
anos, e
UNICEF's
por
been
isso
working on for
estamos
some
muito
years.
felizes de ter
That's why
esse
we're very
seminário,
happy to
porque
have the
ele vai
seminar,
justamente
because
facilitar
it is
a
going
troca
to
de
facilitate
experiência
the
entre os
exchange of
países que
experiences
enfrentam
between the countries
desafios
that are
parecidos, e para que a
facing
gente possa
similar
aprender
challenges,
juntos como
so that we can learn
enfrentar
together
as raízes
the
do
means
fracasso
to
escolar que estão assim
fight that,
nos
understanding the
desafiando nos
roots
vários países da América
of
Latina e Caribe. No Brasil,
the
os
problem.
desafios
In
são
Brazil,
grandes,
the
os
challenges are
números
big, are
são
great.
maiores que antes da pandemia.
We have these figures before the pandemic, of course. We had 2.1 million students who were did not pass. In Brazil, this is 7.6% of the students enrolled. And this came from a time that the figures were dropping, but were still very high, affecting millions of children and adolescents. These figures, this proportion is greater in the north of Brazil if compared to the south and southeast of Brazil. It impacts more Black, indigenous populations, almost 40% higher of reproval. We have children also that have problems in rural areas or in indigenous villages and other villages like that. When we talk about school dropout, we had 123,000 that dropped out of school. This percentage, 2.2%, is greater in high school and in the last years of the elementary or junior high, and affects more the northern populations, the rural populations, the Black, brown, indigenous populations. The last numbers are the distortion age grade, means children who are 2 or more years late in their schooling. This affects 21% of teenagers, 2 out of every 10 students, or 1 in every 5. And just as the other figures, they affect more populations in northeast Brazil, populations who are black, brown, and indigenous, or who have some kind of problem. In Brazil, the problems of abandonment of school and dropping out of school, all of this is part of the same challenge, which is school failure. It starts when the child fails to pass the year twice, and then they think about leaving school, then they go back to school. They enter a cycle that it's a culture of school failure. And this case promotes an age grade distortion at school, and somehow it puts the child in a situation of not being able to learn. And sometimes they are sort of forced to leave school for good. This is a culture of school failure that does affect the most vulnerable children and adolescents, the children that already have a certain many violations of their rights, not just in the school, but also outside the school. And we see that becoming a natural thing. People are used to a part of the population to go through school without really learning, and knowing that they will leave school without benefiting from the process. And as I mentioned, the figures I shared with you are figures that were collected before the pandemic. Now, with the pandemic, it became worse. Brazil is one of the countries that has one of the longest periods to close schools. This affects even more deeply the children and adolescents more vulnerable, like the 4.8 million who do not have access to the internet, and it was impossible for them to keep schooling connection. At UNICEF, we had a study carried out recently showing that we have more than 5 million children and adolescents who have detached from school. We are a huge educational crisis, the greatest in recent history. It affects millions of children and adolescents who are at this moment totally detached from school, running the risk of not going back, or if they do go back, to go back in a situation which is even more exclusive, with an age grade distortion that's even greater, with an even greater risk of dropping out from school later and then abandoning school. That is why it is so important to promote initiatives that will aimed at developing competencies, to develop syllabus that will answer to that challenge, provide something so that these children may be able to transform the trajectory of school failure into a successful school trajectory. This is the name of the project that UNICEF Brazil has been developing. This is going to be presented soon. So I would like to wish you an excellent seminar for all of you. We're very happy to be together with you, even if from a distance. And we're very happy to exchange these experiences, because more than ever, this generation of children and adolescents do need us to focus all our policies or our programs, all our budgets, to bring children and adolescents at this, make them be the center of this initiative, to bring them back to school and break the cycle of school failure. Good seminar to all of you. Thank you very much, Florence. Florence, we thank you for your words, opening the seminar, representing our office in Brazil, as truly this was the office that had the pioneering idea to promote the seminar, and was supported by other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean from the other national UNICEF offices. With the support of our regional office, we finally bring this idea to fruition. we're bringing this vision that we have as a worldwide organization with a specific look into this region. We'd like to invite our colleague, Mr. Yusuf Abdel, to bring his address to us. Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Yes, very well. Thank you for this opportunity. Distinguished Salete Valisan, Director of FLASCO, the Latin American Faculty of Social Science in Brazil. Distinguished Mirella Sandrini, Director of Porticus Latin America. My dear colleague Florence Bauer, representative of UNICEF in Brazil, distinguished representative of government department, intergovernmental organizations, civil society, and education professionals, dear colleagues from UN agencies and UNICEF colleagues. I am very privileged and pleased to address you briefly on this occasion to celebrate this important regional conference on successful school pathway. I heard what Florence has mentioned, especially breaking the cycle of school failure, of interruption of schooling. And this is really an important occasion to advocate for the continuing and successful school pathways. As you are all aware, UNICEF mandate is to ensure the full enjoyment of all human rights by all children and adolescents everywhere in the world. In addition of being recognized by different international treaties, such as the Convention on the Right of the Child, the right to education is an enabling right, which allows and facilitates the realization of many other human rights. Education, as you know, is central to the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In addition to the specific SDG for education, education is key for the achievement of SDGs such as SDG 3, which is health and well-being, SDG 5, gender equality, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG 12, responsible production and consumption, SDG 14, action for climate. Ensuring successful school pathway implies, on the one hand, to guarantee the universal access to inclusive quality education opportunity, and on the other hand, ensure that this results into achieving relevant learning outcome and acquiring the necessary skills for children and adolescents to thrive and reach their potential, their full potential, including in emergency context. Despite the significant progress made by the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, the region still faces a learning crisis, which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. 10.4 million children and adolescents were already out of school before the pandemic in the region. And 100 million children and adolescents are currently affected by COVID-19 related full or partial closure of school. The effect of the crisis and prolonged school closures in terms of both access and learning achievement are enormous, affecting disproportionately the most vulnerable children and adolescents. Therefore, urgent action is needed to rethink our work strategies in education and ensure that this health crisis, which has already become a learning crisis, does not become also a children's right crisis. The challenges posed by COVID-19 constitute an opportunity to reimagine education to be more relevant and equitable for every child and adolescent so that they can develop their skills they need, those skills they need to succeed in life, in school, at work. This also includes redoubling effort to bridge the digital divide. It is fundamental that all the effort aimed at not leaving anyone behind or not leaving anyone behind be based on the principle of progressive universalism, which gives greatest priority to those children and adolescents and adolescent most at risk of being excluded and in vulnerable situation, including indigenous children and adolescents, those with disability, residing in isolated rural community, and or living in situation of migration. Additionally, it's key to use the life cycle approach that provides education and learning opportunities for all children and adolescents in the region, beginning from early childhood up to adolescence and beyond. Protecting the school pathway of children and adolescents is a shared goal, And UNICEF reiterates its commitment to work with partners from government, civil society, and the private sector to ensure every child enjoys their right to a quality, inclusive, and equitable education. Best wishes for successful and fruitful workshop in the following days. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yusuf. It is a pleasure to have you here. It is great for us to have this international perspective on the initiatives we are developing in the region. Thank you very much. With this introduction of our colleague Yusuf representing our regional office, it was made very clear what challenges we have to face for these children and adolescents to have their school trajectories made successful, to help them fulfill the stages of life, going through childhood and adolescence, building a successful school trajectory. Thinking of that, since last year, UNICEF has done a partnership with Flaxo Brazil so that we may think in the children who are excluded, on those for whom the public policy has not reached or has reached them with very poor quality. So the initiatives with Flaxo Brazil have focused traditional populations, and the focus is on how to contribute with the public sector in order to ensure their right to education. Let us tell you a little bit about the seminar and of the very successful partnership. And to do that, we'll call Salete Valizan, Director of Flaxo Brazil. Good afternoon to all. It is a pleasure, a great pleasure to be with you today. I'd like to start by saluting Sidney Florence and Suf, and in their behalf to thank you for this space for the partnership, along with UNICEF, who builds and has built along its history this strong reference of quality in taking care of the child and the adolescent, which is paramount for our existence on this planet and for the continuity of humankind. I'd like to stress this point out because it is important that this UNICEF space may continue to ensure, to monitor, and to promote world public policies and also local public policies to benefit the child and the adolescent. And on behalf of Mirella and Adriana, I'd like to thank for the partnership with Porticus. This space has been carefully built and developed in our region. And we, as Flaxo Brazil, are very proud to be part of this effort and of these two organizations at the moment. I'd like to thank each one of you present here. And in behalf of André, of Renata, and of Rita, who are the head, or are at the head of the Flaxo proposal or participation in the effort, I'd like to salute every one of these institutions, the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, it's headquartered in Brazil, that brings this proposition together. This scenario has been thought of and thought about UNICEF, and very generously Flaxo and Portuguese have had a part in it. We have built a history of a project in these last days, as Sidney has mentioned himself. We have had very good results, but not because they're important by themselves. They're important because people who are developing them are good people, and the results are meaningful to transform education in Brazil regionally and also worldwide, and influencing a worldwide change. Most of the cases are focused in Brazil, but they generate such a diversity and important change that it allows us to understand many of the actions, of the relations, and of the consequences that happen when institutions, organizations, and good people get together to build something new, that go after a proposition that is innovative because it's sometimes obvious, but aimed at something good, which is to ensure the quality of what we believe. Flaxo is the American Faculty of Social Sciences. It acts on fundamental pillars. One of them is education, culture, human rights, communication. These pillars are paramount for us to transform humans or humankind and change the planet. I would like to point out that gratitude, respect, and knowledge is due to each local manager, each secretary, each principal, school principal, each teacher in the classroom who's now behind a computer trying to do his best or her best, to each student, to all of them who make out of the daily practice of school a very fierce challenge in order to help other people make sense of their lives in this planetary existence. I would like also to stress out the importance of what this pandemic brought us. It hasn't just brought us a serious health problem. It hasn't just brought us an increase in the economic and social crisis of differences and of problems that have to be dealt with. It also brought us the certainty that the sensitivity, the ethical and human commitment of one human being towards other is paramount, and it has also brought us and makes it clear before us that the need of human beings is to open their sight and to take care of their mother home. That is paramount, and our own existence depends on it. It also brings us the need to understand the different cultures of different peoples. It may be the peoples, different peoples in Brazil, indigenous peoples, gypsies, riverside, small villages, or others. We have to understand what's happening in India, what's happening in Africa, what's happening in Europe, in the Americas, what's happening in Antarctica, in order to build a humankind that will be able, through a quality education, to build a new time and a new possibility for a future. That's why we're here, and we're going to go deep into the possibilities during these 3 days. But we do it with the certainty that we're not alone. We're not alone. You're not alone. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you very much, Salete. It's a pleasure to have you here representing Flaxo Brazil and to have you representing this team that you have mentioned, as you have been shared and taught us, which has helped us learn and provide the necessary support to the different levels of the school network to add to the school success for all children and adolescents. And in order to enable all of that, in this seminar, not only today, but in past few months, considering the activities we have put in place here in Brazil, in several states, in Latin America, and also based on some other initiatives that you will become familiar with. This is all that provides this moment that we'll have the pleasure to listen to the director, Mirella Sandrini, who will be sharing a few words about the importance of this partnership and how each one of us can actually make a difference in promoting the rights of every children and adolescent. Mirella, you have the floor. Thank you, Sydney. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Portuguese, I would like to share my joy and my enthusiasm to participate in this meeting, in this encounter. We're in the midst of partners who are fully passionate about what they do in favor of education in Brazil and in Latin America. And this is no trivial matter. It's really relevant, particularly after listening to Salete as she spoke about the fact that we are in the midst of this pandemic. For those of you who do not know Portugal, we are a philanthropy institution from Holland originally. We work in several countries in the world. We work with the agenda of human rights and sustainable development. We have been active in Latin America for more than 20 years. We have worked with consistent fronts on education and infant education, particularly in Colombia and Peru, where we have a lot of action on primary and secondary education and professional training. We are highly motivated and engaged in designing our actions in Brazil and participate in a moment like this when we have this event in hand. It's very important for us because we have this commitment with thorough development of individuals, particularly response to situations of extreme adversity. That is what is actually going to promote this change towards a better world. This accumulated experience in rural territories, which we have been accumulating in recent years, where we have tried to reinforce this relationship of the territory with full development of their children and adolescents, putting that together with an ecosystem of partners who are here with us today and others. So this combination brings together very powerful elements for a positive change to the system. And the way we're going to do it, the way that we are going to propose in these couple of days here, we will be looking through this multi-level perspective where we will be able to learn from practice, and we will generate knowledge that will generate policies that will try to change systems. We believe that teachers are the basic elements for whole education to develop children and adolescents. We believe in the work they do in their dedicated efforts. We also pay attention to the fact that in Latin America we have this critical problem in terms of education quality when it comes to promoting the conditions for a better, thorough development of our children. This problem becomes ever more critical when we look at the more vulnerable groups. As I mentioned before, this is an opportunity for us to create relevant and significant work for the country, which has encouraged us to expand networks, to extend contacts, particularly for the Amazonian territory, which has been the geographic focus where we have a bigger and deeper footprint in Brazil. When we look at the demographic profile of the Amazon region, we see that more than 75% of the population inhabiting the northern states of Brazil declare themselves as non-white. Most of them are composed of indigenous peoples, the riverside communities, and quilombola peoples. So there's a social diversity which is often not properly contemplated for the purposes of promoting education and now achieving excellence in terms of quality. Also, the study conducted by Flaxo last year involving quilombola indigenous researchers and also field work has shown the power of these educational challenges faced by these groups in Brazil, and particularly when it comes from those who have direct connection with those territories, we can see that we still have a long journey ahead of us before we achieve the full rights and enjoyed by those populations. We are well aware and in close connection with the lessons we learned in Colombia and in Peru. This has been extraordinary for the moment when we are designing the way we're going to be acting in Brazil. We have similar problems and solutions. They are not identical, obviously, because we are respecting each territory's peculiarities, but I think it is a wealth of experiences and lessons learned that will make a difference for our efforts. In those countries, Colombia and Peru, we have observed that different ethnical groups, they are subjected to the low quality of the needs and the scarce offer of education in the territories, also very similar to the Amazonian context. And this is how we have developed this partnership with the UNICEF in order to bring this seminar, to put the seminar together. We believe in the power of taking this initiative out to the other states, particularly with an outlook on traditional communities in the northern region, looking at the challenges that have been faced by students' school life in order to ensure that everybody has a successful school trajectory. And the success of this initiative is very much reflected on today's event. We are gathered together, we're gathering people together and situations and cases which are very special. Educational professionals from various Latin American countries, we do believe that sharing experiences here is crucial to help inspire us to show that there are potential ways in which we will be able to promote and offer education that will really be transformational, that will promote thorough development to those individuals. This is why we're here. We're very happy to be part of this huge ecosystem of partners to share experiences and also to celebrate this partnership, which is so consistent because of these committed and engaged partners. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of it all.
Muito obrigado, Mirella.
Thank you, Mirella, very much. On behalf of UNICEF Brazil, we would like to express our gratitude for this partnership, which looks at more and more actions that we are going to be developing. And I am sure that with Portugal's support, this is going to be making ever more sense. So once again, I would like to thank all of our leaders and every one of our organizations that are participating in the seminar for your participation, for your initial remarks. And therefore, this event is started officially now. I am very happy for your words. They are necessary reflections about what the context is in Brazil and in Latin America as well, concerning the development of those successful school trajectories. Once again, I would like to express my gratitude to you, and we will be sharing and enjoying these 3 days together. So in order to continue with today's program, I would like to share some of the details of what we have in store for the coming 2 days. We will be together all the way until late afternoon on Thursday, actually early evening as well, where we will be having discussions about those successful school trajectories and what the experiences have been in Brazil and in Latin American countries, and how they have actually providing and bringing those rights to those children and adolescents. Again, I would like to say that after this brief talk of mine, we'll have an opening panel which will be led by Ítalo Dutra, who is the head of the UNICEF Education Department in Brazil, which will also include some special guests whose names I'll be sharing with you in a while. After this opening panel, when we will be discussing more in depth the roots and the causes of this culture of school failure, in order to close this first day, we'll have a cultural presentation. A cultural presentation that comes all the way from the state of Mato Grosso do Sul, which brings the roots of indigenous peoples. So I'd like to ask you all to stay with us until the very end of our transmission today, because it's going to be really worth your effort, because we have a lot to learn from the message that this group is going to be sharing with us at the end of the day. Tomorrow, we'll have another 2 workshops where we will be able to share those Brazilian experiences as well as experiences developed in the Latin American and Caribbean region. Tomorrow, specifically, we'll be talking about programs that bring forth and provide ways in which we can fight the root of this culture of school failure, dropout conditions, failure conditions. We will be basing our experiences on what has happened in the various countries. We'll be talking about remote education and the means for remote education. Those will be the main topics for the coming days. And on Thursday, in order to close the day and the seminar, we will have 2 workshops. So in the beginning of the day on Thursday, we'll be talking about inclusive education, looking at children and teenagers with disabilities. And then we'll have a culture on a workshop on culture. How will we be able to respect and abide by the different cultural aspects of each people, of each original peoples when we consider educational development? Those themes have been highly disputed under great demand by all parts. That has been thoroughly discussed, and many offers have been made. We have been developing this experience for a year and a half now, and that involves not only Brazil, but also other countries. So we thought of bringing those themes as the themes that would provide greater discussion, that would raise or arise the interest on school practitioners. In our workshop on Thursday afternoon, we'll have another cultural presentation to close our 3-day seminar with Amazonizando, which is a collective of professionals, artists, and quilombolas who will be sharing music and dance and a lot of culture to share with us. So for those 3 days, we want to have you with us, participating in each of those attractions and each of those discussions. I'd like to invite you to participate through the chat box with suggestions as well as sharing experiences. This seminar is intended to take those discussions as far as possible. Discussions about this trajectories of school success. So those of you who are with us, please feel free to participate as if you were here in presence. So do rely on the chat feature so we can actually feed into the discussions with your experiences from wherever you are. Starting now with our opening panel, where we will be discussing the roots of this phenomenon, which is called school failure culture. I would like to invite my co-worker and also my boss, who's Ítalo Dutra, the head of the UNICEF Education Department, also with the colleagues from the Glaxo. I would like to invite Professor André Lázaro, who's the Director for Public Policies, and I would like to invite, last but not least, our colleague from Argentina, from the UNICEF National Office in Argentina, who's an expert in education, Corin Steinberg. So I would like to pass the floor now to those experts now, and be sure you make use of the chat feature. They have a lot of experience and involvement with schools, and they are certainly going to be sharing very good knowledge and very good information to all of us. So thank you. Thank you, Sidney. Before you leave us and in this virtual environment, I would like to thank André, Vincenzo, we refer to him as Enzo, very tenderly, as well as Cora. But I would also like to thank Sidney, and on behalf of this individual, the entire UNICEF Brazil team, and all of the other UNICEF offices in Argentina, our regional office, UNICEF Ecuador, UNICEF Peru, UNICEF Colombia, UNICEF Paraguay, and together with us, who helped us put the seminar together. My special gratitude to Sidney, our host in this event, who is not leaving the UNICEF family, but he is soon to leave the UNICEF Brazil family in order to engage in new adventures at Equatorial UNICEF. So on behalf of UNICEF Brazil, I would like to express our gratitude for this time Sidney has shared with us, and wishing him all the best in this new adventure. And also saying that we will keep our arms open at all times in Brazil and in Latin America to welcome you back. So thank you very much, Sidney. We'll see you soon. And now let's get started with our talk. I was instructed more than once, actually, to speak slowly. So I am in the habit of speaking fast, but I would like to express my gratitude for this audience. This is a very important seminar for UNICEF Brazil. We have a lot of collaboration from our regional office and office in the countries that I have already mentioned, Flaxo, and the very important support from Portuguese Brazil. And in this panel, we will be talking about the theme that brings us together, which are those discontinued trajectory of our students in Latin America and in the Caribbean. And we'll be thinking about those discontinued trajectories with an eye on how we work in collective terms, with an outlook on the territories where these children and adolescents live, so that we can fight this process. Welcome, Cora. Welcome, Enzo. Welcome, André Lázaro. We will start, and our colleagues from the opening panel have already brought forth some of the important aspects and shared some data of what this culture means, this culture of school failure. As we see it, this culture has to do specifically with the way our educational systems and our society as a whole, how that fails our students in the sense that it does not offer them the best opportunities for them to learn. This is a very important issue. When we speak about school failure, we're talking about this incapacity that our educational systems have. When we look at those systems in an enlarged way, we're not only talking about our schools, but we're rather talking about the system as a whole, and the role that the systems and the schools and society and the families need to operate collectively in order to ensure school success to our children and adolescents. Our theme is to look at those trajectories which are discontinued because of various reasons, many of which are related with the educational sector, but also many others that are related to many other sectors. So, when we speak about discontinued trajectories, irregular trajectories in schools, we are referring to an action that needs to be systemic and in connection with many sectors, which includes obviously the educational sector. So in order to talk about it from the perspective of countries such as Brazil and Argentina, as well as from a regional perspective, we are together in this panel in order to talk about these discontinued trajectories. So I would like to thank you once again for your participation. We're keeping track of the talk through the chat feature. The seminar is going to be recorded and made available through the web pages related to this event. All of the links will be made available to you. So, I would like to call to have contributions on Brazil's perspective. We would like to invite André Lázaro from Flaxo Brazil, as they have been a very important partner to UNICEF Brazil. André, you have the floor. Thank you, Ítalo. Good afternoon. I would like to congratulate Enzo and Cora for your participation, and the translators who make this conversation available to other languages. And I would like to express my gratitude for this opportunity, because this is one of the most difficult themes to address in Brazilian education. Back in 1990, again, 1990, an important Brazilian scientist, he was a physicist. He had a PhD in physics from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro's physics laboratory. He took an interest in education and started to study data related to school flows with information from the 1980s. And he developed this concept, which is impressive today, which is this pedagogy of repeatedness. Professor Sérgio Costa Ribeiro, who unfortunately passed away in 1995. He left very important studies in the area of education and in educational metrics, and he warned us about it. And this paper called The Pedagogy of Repeating or Failing School Grades, which is available for your access through Google. This study was published by Advanced Studies by USP in 1991, also by the Fundação Carlos Chagas. He makes an argument to say that he's actually going to compare great transition rates, and his argument is that there is a great effort on the part of the families. This effort was to keep their children in school, but school systems were incapable of, they were incompetent to ensure that this permanence would be translated into education and advancing and complying with the school transitions. And in his thoughts, he says, anthropological analysis this far clearly show through the culture of the system this imposed school failure to the students and to their parents and to the social political system. Rarely to the children, to their training, and to school organization. And it's very symptomatic to say that Brazilian families' efforts to keep their children in school is not translated in more competent school experience. Even in private schools, the so-called elite schools, that is explained in part through professors' competence and wages. This is a 1991 warning that it became a classic in Brazilian sociology and education that placed this issue of school failure as a policy. So I think it is very important. Florence, who represents UNICEF in Brazil, and I would like to express my gratitude for the invitation to participate in this meeting, in this encounter. She brought forth this very important issue to think about the roots to this policy. Unquestionably, in Brazil, one of those roots is racism. Racism is the factor that has to be considered when we try to understand and when we try to overcome this school failure. I do not like this term because it does not have the clarity that Ítalo just used to explain to us, which talks about the failure of the system, because we usually think about the failure of the students. What we know is their performance, but we do not know and we do not measure, we do not evaluate the other dimensions which are part of what Oscar Ribeiro referred to as school organization. I think that the policy proposed and very well developed by the UNICEF invites us to see that this dimension of school failure, in order to understand this complexity, and in order to have a better look at Brazil, we need some basic information. First, Brazil has a school contingent, school in terms of basic education, which expands to nearly 50 million people. 50 million people is Colombia's population. So Brazil has something that is equivalent to Colombia's population in the classroom of basic education. Now, this expressive amount of students, they are served by 2.2 million teachers. So it's similar to the entire population of Uruguay. So those professionals are working in 180,000 schools. It's a great dispersion. And I usually say, I refer to repetition, and I underline that. I usually say that school is potentially the best and the broadest system to help meet a public right in Brazil. Education is the broadest right enjoyed by the population. But there are dimensions of meanness, because as it includes, it also excludes. And as it excludes, it places the burden on the chosen ones and their families to exclusion. So there's a structural dimension to the Brazilian structural process, which makes for education in Brazil become a class heritage rather than a right to all. Brazil, as we start the third decade of the 21st century, we still need to respond to that issue, which is how can we transform class heritage, which is known as education, how can we transform that into everybody's right? When we look at data, Florence briefly explained them, and they are contained in this UNICEF documents developed in partnership with CEPEC. This document informs us first that indigenous populations, populations in the countryside, and Quilombola populations are the populations where this age grade distortion and school dropout rates are proportionally much bigger than those in the other territories of the country. So the black population in the countryside, and indigenous and Quilombola populations, they are very harshly affected simultaneously by a number of different aspects, by institutional weaknesses in ensuring the rights, the right to life, the right to safety, the right to territory, the right to safe food. It's interesting to look at the following. On the one hand, the most affected populations, affected by this age grade distortion, which denounces school failure and school dropout rates, they converge upon the same populational groups. We refer to that as intentionality. This intersection between poverty, the territory, the country's region. Therefore, it's not a matter of, talking about one school or another school because of this procedure. It's actually a matter of the system working towards exclusion. This is a very serious issue, very important, because it's actually ingrained in the operation of Brazilian education in a manner which is invisible to many players, because exclusion has become something natural in Brazil, has become second nature. Just as murdering the black youth in the peripheries of the big cities has become second nature to the rest of the country, we have to make reference to this brutal deaths that are imposed in many peripheral areas of the country, particularly in Rio de Janeiro, as was the case in São Paulo just yesterday. So we are facing this racist system, which is mean because it offers education as a trajectory for overcoming inequalities, but in the core of education, they maintain these procedures which are procedures of exclusion. So it's important for us to have this fact very clear so we can understand the relevance of the action implemented by UNICEF. On the one hand, we try to focus this age grade distortion, and in doing so, they put forth this concept of educational equity. All of the Brazilian manifests, Brazilian Constitution, the pronouncements made at the UN and UNESCO, with which Brazil is a subscriber, all of them say education is a right of everybody, is everybody's right. Education must be required by the state and from the state. Also, another very important question is, what is this education? What is the education we want? Is that education that will turn everybody into equals with the same concept, or is that education that will help people interact with the diversity and differences that are all over the country and all over the Latin America? I have my flag here to underline the fact that this country has a history of education, and this country expects more initiatives of transformation, so we are not accommodated with this injustice which hits the entire educational system. UNICEF also has played a very important role, particularly now when the Brazilian government has renounced facing the pandemic and has actually partnered with the virus, is disseminating the virus, is promoting ineffective medication, and tries to silence critics of that system, and tries to have the attempts to ensure the right to education during the pandemic has been absolutely inefficient. And in fact, a few months into the pandemic, the National Congress had approved resources to be invested in the school technologies in terms of connectivity for students and teachers and the poorer schools. That was actually vetoed by the president, by the national president. The resource was vetoed, but the Congress has dropped this veto, and we will therefore have the next semester enjoying more resources to serve those schools. At a critical moment like this, the remiss of the national government is not to be accepted. International entities like the UNICEF has acted together by developing networks to live up to this challenge. We are partners of the UNICEF, and we are very happy to be able to work towards responding to this challenge. How can we actually face this culture of school failure? In the interest of time, I'll be very brief now. The research, and I would like to pay homage to all of the researchers. All of them were women. I'm the only man, and there were only women in our groups. They are researchers coming from the field, coming from indigenous and Quilombola populations and other experts. We were able to say that school failure is a very mean term. The correct thing would be to build together this concept of school trajectories that are dignified. And why is it dignified school trajectory?
Because the school result presented by the student at school, while it remains in school, while it goes from one grade to another, from the beginning to the end of primary school and then middle school, then going into college or university, we see that to ensure this process, it does not depend only on the student or the school. Brazil has approved in 2012 a law, a bill, a federal law, from an initiative of the those days Ministry of Education, the minister José Henrique Paim. They approved the law of the articulate plan of action. It intends to face a huge challenge Brazil faces. Brazilian educational system, these almost 50 million students I mentioned, the 2.2 million teachers about whom I spoke, they're organized in a very dispersed way, very decentralized way. Since the empire, Brazilian education is decentralized. Each municipality, each state, theoretically, has its own educational system, has its own norms. It obeys the general norms of education, but it's not coordinated. In the pandemic, the National Council of Education has issued opinions that the state and municipal councils had to validate in their own regions. So it's a very decentralized system. It's not a system, so as to say, per se. There's a debate in Congress about the national system of education. So what happens in the country is that each state, each municipality has its own educational traits, particular characteristics. And the union, the federal union that gathers more resources and is responsible for distributing those resources for many, many years, that distribution hasn't followed rigorously technical criteria. As of the years 2006, 2007, when Prova Brasil was implemented, when we saw in a universal examination of the 5th grade, how are the students learning Portuguese and math? Then we noticed that municipalities that had the greatest educational frailties were the ones who had never received technical support and money from the Ministry of Education. So a plan was created, and this plan was part of a diagnosis that each state and municipality has to produce. Diagnosis checks 4 things: people management, the education of the teachers, the pedagogical practices, and the physical infrastructure and the teaching resources available at schools. When you check these 4 parameters, the law says these parameters are a condition for a good school trajectory, for a successful one. That's why we opt not to talk about failure anymore, but suggesting to adopt the dignified school trajectories. What are those? Those are where you have the management of people, where you have a proper education of the teachers, when you have the support to teaching practices and adequate infrastructure. What we see today in Brazilian education today, on the 15th, some news from O Globo, G1 portal, says that a research done and Brazilian teaching students, 1,700,000 students study in schools where there's no drinking water. 816,000 study where there's no adequate bathrooms. More than 500,000 study in schools that do not have sewage systems. Many study in schools in which there is no electricity, and 8 million do not have broadband internet. So when I talk about dignified school trajectories, when Flaxo researchers investigated the field conditions on indigenous peoples, quilombolas, they found extraordinary results because of community efforts, the work of the teachers, involvement of families with result region who coordinated part of this work. When we see these figures, we see that we cannot think about isolating school results from the context in which it is produced. That's why I want to talk about dignified trajectories, school trajectories. We have to check the processes, the inputs, and how they're articulated to ensure the right to education. Well, I'm finishing. I'd like to stress the point that the material elements that we have investigated are not enough to face the racism issue. Racism is a structural component of Brazilian society. Racism is a structural component of exclusion. It's a structural component of violence. It's a structural component of the loss of income, of low life expectation for most of the black population, because more than 54% of the population in Brazil is black. So there's a dilemma. Either we embrace the rights of all, or we're going to reproduce at school what the school denies by its own nature, which is to give all the same rights. I thank for the opportunity. I congratulate my colleagues from Flaxo for their brilliant research they carried out. I thank immensely Portuguese. Without it, this work would not happen. And then UNICEF, which brings us together, articulates us, and brings us together with other institutions in Latin America, so it can fight this extraordinary injustice against the youth who have to go to school to have their rights ensured, to have better life, and to also improve the lives in their families. We don't lose just them, we lose all. We lose talents, capabilities, and also the rights to live in peace with our own population. It's paramount that population will embrace and ensure to all the rights to education, but an education is pertinent to these people, to their conditions of life, ensuring reproducibility of good life conditions for them. Thank you very much for your attention. He's muted.
Os percalços da vida online.
Well, the problems of online life. We always forget to turn on the mic when we come back. First of all, thank you very much for your words. Very important topics were tackled. It's the Brazilian context on the problem. All of us, when we talk about school and when we talk about the challenges that Brazilian schooling system and, of course, Latin American and the Caribbean schooling systems, we cannot differentiate the challenges faced by the school from structural racism. We cannot separate. We have enough knowledge in the field of education to consider this a basis structural discussion to be held for the problem to be tackled appropriately. Now, what you said, what did draw my attention was that we should look at this thing, what makes the trajectory of children and adolescents in school a success. It's a combination of factors, and sometimes there's a huge asymmetry. There's a huge effort from the families, which is not corresponded, is not matched by the government to provide in that place where a formal education is expected to be offered, the opportunities for those children to be properly educated. It's not an offer of an opportunity, which is generic, but an effort for that child and for that teenager in that context. We all know that where the poorest population lie, there are also the poorest infrastructure, schools, and also teachers who have very few opportunities for their own education. This is a very specific point and very important point to be brought up, and we can also share it to have also the opinion of other countries. Without further delays, let's call our colleague and friend Cora Steinberg, who's our expert in education from Argentina. Besides being an excellent colleague, she carries out a work which is genius work in UNICEF Argentina, in collaboration with the educational system in Argentina. And she's got experiences that we had the opportunity to share in a seminar we had in Manaus 2 years ago about rural education. And today, we're together again to talk about the interrupted trajectories of our kids in school. And now Cora will bring the experience in the context of Argentina. We know that we have lots of challenges in common, we, Brazil and Argentina. Welcome, Cora. Now the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Italo. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Even if virtually, it's a pleasure to be present with you in Brazil and with all of us who are participating from distant places. We want to share our concern, which is the concern of the participants of all of the countries, which is the urgency to think about the better efforts and solutions for the education. Thank you, Sydney, for all the work you had to prepare this conference in the space. Thank you, Florence Barr, for being here. And congratulations, because this dialogue is a necessary space for us to build up knowledge and bring it together. What happens in the system, what happens at schools, and we're bringing to visibility the good practices that happen here and there, and teams of management, and what is developed to ensure better and more opportunities for learning. It's an honor to share with Enzo and with Andres Lázaro. And in Argentina, we work a lot with Flaxo, with our researching colleagues. And there are many elements that we consider in our strategy to work with the many governments nationally and the states level. And we try to find new ways to deal with the secondary school. The title of the seminar is very important, to put the focus on building knowledge on building successful school trajectories. This brings a magnifying lens on the school failure, but we want to have a positive look on the topic. We want to accelerate virtuous processes, and some countries have started to develop many different transformation processes at school level, which are very rich, and they should be magnified to inspire and to warm and instruct the decision makers so that the way to do school may be changed and new and better initiatives may be implemented to contribute to the development of the children. The access to school, but not only that, but also knowledge to build their own future. The focus of the panel is around the critical issue, which is education. And we have been working on it for a long time. What is the relationship between the school and the context in which it exists, and the context of the society around it, in which it is embedded, for which it works? The school works for that society. So this view tries to understand in what way is the school organized, and what are the requirements of the population to which the school will serve, so as to develop as more as possible their potentiality. And many schools have as an aim to improve the lives of children, which should be at school, but we know the limitations of the traditional model, and it makes it difficult for all to advance in their path or in their paths through this traditional model. That is the challenge in our region, especially having access to a pool of knowledgeable people. All knowledge is very valuable, and it's very important to tackle that tap of knowledge in order to improve, to promote a full citizenship, to allow them to have good jobs and to build their project of life for themselves and their families. So let me tell you and share with you a little bit of the challenges of school in Argentina, secondary school. A lot is shared with the diagnosis André has presented from Brazil. Our figures, obviously, are not as big as Brazil's, so the scale is smaller, but there's something in common between our countries, which is we have strong inequalities, very, very strong inequalities. They have become chronicle. These are situations that have been traditionally difficult to erase or to revert. This epidemics has even made it worse. So this kind of conversation, this kind of seminar has become really critical in order for us to find ways to accelerate. Some countries have started it, but we have to take on the responsibility as adults to in different responsibilities or different positions of responsibility to implement the changes in order to ensure education in our countries. From Argentina, we know we have a federal country, basic education from the elementary level to the secondary level and until university. We have a decentralized system. We have 24 jurisdictions, and they're responsible of their own educational systems. But they are coordinated through the National Council for Education. The basic education, initial level until the secondary level, 10.5 million students are in the system. In the secondary education, before the pandemic, we had more than 500,000 children out of the system. We know that Italo said at the beginning, many teenagers enter school at the secondary level, but still some are at the primary level because of different trajectories, because of different problems. They are still in the primary level because they have a deficit of grade. They have a number of boys and girls at the last level that theoretically should be in the secondary education, but some of them represent the complexity of these trajectories, school trajectories, which deal with the difficulty with the increase in knowledge that they would have to take in. We have different school systems which are fragmented, and this doesn't match the organization of work sometimes, not in the school and not in the society. Also, the secondary level of school has its problems. It has been fragmented in 10, 12 subjects per year. We have theoretical ages there and different academic levels that will indicate the amount of material each student will have to take in and to go to the next year. But around 30% of the students go through it older than they should be, 2 or 3 years more than they should be as they go through the classes. Data from Argentina also shows that the traditional school, the regular school, has huge limitations in ensuring the basic knowledge to all of the students that get to the last year of the secondary school or high school. 7 out of 10 students that finish school at the last year of secondary school do not have the minimum knowledge in math, and 4 in 10 don't do it for their own language and literature. This only indicates, it's a clear indicator of the capability of the regular educational system, which is a massive system. It does not ensure to all what has been considered the needed amount of knowledge that they should have at the end of the cycle. What really worries us a lot, which is one of the worst and more clearly indicates the limitations of the system that our countries have, is 1 out of every 2 children that go the secondary student finishes in the regular time. So only half of them, because many of them during the trajectory leave regular school and go in other modalities. Some young adults finish when they're young adults, others finish their schooling through different projects and modalities that offer different strategies for finishing the mandatory schooling years according to the regulations of our country. So when they're about 20, we have around 60% of people who finish schooling around 20. So this is the first huge alert, something that we already had before the pandemic. The country is making an effort to correct that, how to think a new school for teenagers to be in and learn. How can we strengthen the institution of school? As Andres mentioned, it should serve all the children, but not all are happy pursuing its path, which is vital in their cycle of life. There are other aspects. What are the limitations of the traditional schooling system? Through research in Argentina, we know, through the mix, which is an operative that works in many countries, they have identified that one of the reasons for school abandonment or for dropping out of school in the traditional schooling system that we have in our countries, one of the reasons for dropping out or abandonment are the ones which are extra school, the economic situation, the region where they live, the limitations to ensure access to school material, to transportation, also to the need to enter very soon in the work market, labor market. Sometimes they have to be taking care of other children. So this is not school-related necessarily, it's outside of school, but there's a suite of elements linked to school dropout and abandonment. They have to do or are related to school factors, with the traits of the school itself. In the last research we did, more than 30% of 15, 17 boys and girls who had dropped out of school and interrupted schooling said they did it because they didn't think it was relevant, because school was not for them, because the proposition was not deemed important for their life project. As Andres mentioned, these things are not seen sometimes. Does school answer to the needs of the population? We're provoking the possibility to belonging. Many boys and girls in our country have to go to school every day, but they don't see the relevance. If they don't see the importance of school for them, if they don't see an opportunity to self-development, why would they go? So I would like also to point out that the ways to measure learning and school trajectory are unevenly distributed. The likelihood of interruption of school between the boys and girls who are more vulnerable is greater. The ones who live in the more isolated places, they have to put more effort to remain in school. The more marginal neighborhoods of the big cities also suffer more. These children need to have our support to be in school, and this is one of the great challenges of educational policies. So we have to build some sort of diagnosis to put down at the table so as to identify, said in many other forums, the inequalities before pandemic have been increased with the pandemic. And in my opinion, these are some of the great challenges we have to ensure good and meaningful school trajectories, to allow people to access the suite of knowledge that is needed for them to have a good life. Now, will we be able to develop the educational systems to reinvent secondary education, to improve the transformation of the way we do schooling, to strengthen the abilities and the strength of the teachers, to redo the practices in class, to keep students in. It is very clear that we cannot do it the same way we used to do it. The context forced us to rethink what we already knew, the present education, and now we have to build other strategies to include every child and to keep their link with the school. Now we have more challenges, and the great inequalities were made more evident with the pandemic, and the possibility for them to access technology has been made clear. The importance of accessing technology to go to school is now paramount, and in this 21st century it is needed to have access to technology to develop in our schooling system, in our cultural system, and we have to ensure education through the system that it has to be renewed. One of the pillars should be to build and generate the conditions of differentiated policies that take into account the integralization needed for teenagers to be included in the system who are in very, very diverse situations themselves. Also, the way to generate knowledge, the system of information itself, the planning and execution of the implementation of the processes is important. And our challenge to generate these conditions, all the money needed and the assumptions needed that need to be considered for this implementation. There are challenges at the school level. How should they revise or review their own practices? They have to build on their strength, and how, on doing so, they can implement the transformation process, which has to be continuous and should follow up the building of knowledge of their own community so as to include people, developing the school trajectory that takes into account principles of equality and also the impact of the pandemic and what effect it had in the teenagers and their families. We know that 40% of teenagers have manifested stress and anguish and depression. We have to take that into account in our educational system because this will certainly hinder the ability of our children to be part of the educational system themselves. And we should put on the table challenges for the class, how to change the practices of teaching and learning. We should have heterogeneous classes with such different situations from different teenagers that come to us. As Ítalo mentioned, we advanced different models that put at the center of the table different possibilities of work. Projects to teach, to integrate work projects, and we should ask proper questions that will bring the interest of the children in learning, where relevant content that they will learn in the secondary level of education. A central theme has to do with the assessment of what has been learned. Our teaching has to include the evaluation of what has been learned, what have they achieved in participating in the system. As this information process, we have to recover the assessment of what they have learned. One last point to finish is the experience that we have had. I want to share with you this transformation change work that we're talking about has to be built along with the actors in the system. It's not just theories, public policies from top down. We think that the research and the experience in the field talks to us about the potential that there is in the innovation change process if there's a network or a networking participation system for our children. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Muchísimas gracias, Cora.
Thank you very much, Cora.
Agora câmbio para mi português.
I'll get back to my Portuguese.
Acho que houve também na tua fala, Cora, alguns elementos que serão debatidos
you included some of the elements that are actually going to be discussed in the process of this seminar. And I would like to point at them now because we will later have the opportunity to elaborate on some of those points. And I think we're all working. Our traditional models do not have the necessary response to ensure children and adolescents with their right to education. This is absolutely proven by studies, in-depth studies, statistical data. It's absolutely clear that school failure, which has been used by many countries, Brazil included, and Latin American countries as well, as a learning strategy that does not bring forth true results for students' learning. There are many other points, obviously, and I am actually going to elaborate on some of them through questions at the end. But there's no doubt also that it is crucial to count on all players in the educational system and the school community to count on their participation. Education professionals, school managers, this group of players need to work together. And they are the ones who are in the territory of the school community and civil society organizations and other public services and different equipment that may contribute to building new educational possibilities and the territories where the more vulnerable children and adolescents are located, and whether having their right to education denied. So I'll get back to my Portuguese or my Spanish to invite my colleague Vincenzo Placo, who is now our regional advisor for education in our regional office in Panama. So I'll pass the floor to get this perspective on Latin American and Caribbean region. So you have the floor, Enzo. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ítalo.
Thank you, Ítalo.
A poner mi cronómetro para seguro de no pasarme con el tiempo. Muchísimas gracias antes que nada a Cora y André.
Thank you very much to Cora and André. It's a privilege for me to sit virtually around the same panel with you. And I hope to have an opportunity to exchange with you in person and throughout our encounter here. First countries, Brazil and Argentina. And I would like to use this opportunity to present a visual outlook concerning the situation of school children and adolescents. A few minutes to invite you to reflect about the concept we talk about school trajectory. We refer to children, to students' performance throughout the course in school, all the way to secondary education and even further. So it's actually a matter of a concept that has to do with the opportunities for access, permanence, and achievement in education by means of all children and adolescents. But it also has to do with the way in which this access, permanence, and summit, it has to do with access to relevant and quality education. Therefore, protecting the educational trajectories mean expected school performance, which is expected according to the progressions and the time allocated by the different school systems. Compare that with the true trajectories of those that establish this discrepancy between theoretical trajectories and real trajectories on both ends. Access to educational system starts at the preschool level, and also dropouts from schools and reiterated attendance, and also repetition, grade repetition, and the low levels of learning. Third, to protect educational trajectories in school means to design and implement public policy solutions that have to be multi-sector and socially and culturally relevant. As you said, I too love mathematics and numbers, so I'm going to be presenting some regional data to help us frame the problem, looking at the conversations we're going to have in the course of this seminar. Before the pandemic, some 10.5 million children and adolescents were out of school. A few more students, a few more boys than girls. We're talking about 5.5 against 5, so a little more boys than girls. So there is a gender difference, but that affects both the boys and the girls. In addition to that, 10.5 refers to children who were outside the preschool in the previous year. They were outside the level, they were outside the formal education system. So, trying to look at the level of exclusions and how exclusion varies across different age groups as we advance in the school pathway or the school trajectory, the level of exclusion increases. Before the pandemic, we had 1.7 million students outside primary education who were at the age of attending that school. So those children, those 1.7 were outside the school. 2.3 million adolescents were outside of the school. And nearly 6.5 million adolescents approach for that purpose. And first, we have to provide timely access to school or preschool. And we also have to look at facilitating transition between the different levels, between primary and secondary education, and also between secondary education and the jobs market. And concerning the relevance of secondary education, if we do not have relevant secondary education for adolescents, and after they leave school, if we do not allow them to join the jobs market with the necessary skills that they need for that, that is a problem, and we have to do something about it. I was mentioning before, and also the other panel members were mentioned the different levels of exclusion. So, if we look at the different impacts of exclusion, we realize that the most excluded children are the usual suspects, the poor children, those who live in rural or remote areas, those children who have some kind of disability, or the ones who belong to indigenous peoples or Afro-descended peoples. So, in addition to the life cycle approach, as I mentioned, we also need to identify, and Ítalo was mentioning something like that, if I understood your Portuguese correctly, we need this double focus, meaning instead of tackling structural causes, which are discontinued school pathways, we also need to focus on specific institutions and implement specific measures or ad hoc measures that will be focusing and that will be geared to solving these levels of exclusion. I just mentioned that protecting the educational trajectory is not only a matter of access. So let's look at some numbers concerning learning. And I have to say that it's a little more somber outlook, if that is possible. Before the pandemic, based on standard studies at the regional level and at the global level, 35 million children and adolescents in the region did not achieve the minimum level of learning in terms of reading. And we're talking about primary and secondary age students. And if we look at mathematics, 50 million students and children and adolescents did not achieve those levels. So André mentioned that 50 million is the size of the Colombian population, to give you an idea of the size of it. And if we elaborate in terms of mathematical learning, some 6% of the teenagers who are attending school and who finalize secondary education, they come out of the school without the minimum mathematical skills. So if that was a problem before, and that was a reason for concern, I believe that it becomes ever more complex in a context where jobs and digitalization of the world require knowledge of mathematics that's not so elementary anymore. So that actually has us think about it. Those low levels of learning are actually going to have an impact on this repetition level, more at the secondary level than at the primary level, and that generates this
a nivel regional se sigue un patrón parecido a lo que describimos para Argentina,
similar to what was described for Argentina and Brazil. Those rates move from 90% concerning primary education, and they drop down to 80% when it comes to secondary education, and 60% at secondary level, meaning concluding secondary education. By means of these data, we can see this vicious circle between repetition which eventually leads to discontinued school trajectories. More details will be included in the concept notes to this international conference. I'm not saying anything new when I say that due to COVID, the Latin American and Caribbean region has experienced the largest school closure in the world if compared to the other regions of the world. Therefore, this panorama that I've just shared with you is unfortunately geared to fail, both in terms of access as well as in terms of learning. And the expected results in coming years is going to keep increasing the number of youth who are neither employed nor having any education, which was revolving around 20 million youth before the pandemic. And I will conclude my talk now so that we have more time for participants' involvement. The educational structure invites us to think about those bigger numbers, but it also invites us to think about the more micro level in terms of getting to know the story and history of each individual student, to identify what are the exclusion profiles, and to think about holistic solutions which go far beyond the educational aspect, as Cora was suggesting in her talk. I am very thankful for the possibility of being here and also to be able to join this encounter together with my co-workers at the regional office, and I am sure that in these 3 days we will be sharing experiences that will allow us to contribute to educational inclusion and to ensure effective rights to education to all children and adolescents in Latin America and in the Caribbean. So thank you very much for this invitation.
Muchas gracias, Enzo.
Thank you, Enzo.
Y ahí me sumo a lo que ha dicho Cora.
And I will join the words of proffered by Cora and her presentation also the content rather than on the processes that happen to be much more bureaucratic, because this is a challenge that many of our countries in Latin America have. We have these school curricula references which are very closely connected or related with, they're sort of linked to the evaluation systems. Massive evaluation systems, parametric evaluation systems. So many educational aspects are lost when we only achieve measurements in that fashion, and we fail to provide the models or the opportunities, the educational opportunities for those children who need to have provisions that are more adapted to their needs and also to the regional expectations of life. I will get back to Portuguese once again, but I will speak slowly. And for the time being, I'd like to thank the 3 of you for your participation. Those who are watching us, you can send your questions through the chat feature, but perhaps I would like to start this question and answer session by coming back to André and considering his previous experience with positions at the federal government, with your capacity to reflect upon this topic, to perhaps elaborate on the role of structural racism with a broader view of
o contexto da escola
not only the school, the context of schools, but also looking at racism and the role racism plays in this context of discontinued trajectories, of unworthy schools, and this failure that actually produces a system that is faulty in the sense of helping children and teenagers to ensure their right to education, which is a duty that we, the society, have, and is also a duty of our government. I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to say that UNICEF in the 2000s, and you were keeping abreast of that in those days, it launched this initiative to fight racism and at the level of children education. And there was this reaction by the Brazilian society and the Brazilian society that children should be ignorant of the racist dimension in the constitution of our society. So this effort depends on us, the whites. It's very important that white people be clear about the fact that we are part of this system of racial relations. There's this sociologist, Marcia Lima, I like her very much, she's a professor at USP. She says that the racial issue in Brazil should be seen from three different perspectives. One of that I address here, and also Enzo and Cora made mention about them, which is this dimension of inequalities, both educational and health inequalities, also revenues and life expectancy as well. If you look at the white and non-white populations in Brazil, there are inequalities, all of which are unfavorable to the black population. The second dimension, which Marcia Lima recommends for us to think about the racial issue in Brazil, is the following. We have to think that all of us are involved in racial relations. Because the Brazilian society, I am not touching on the Latin American debate because it's got its own complexity, but back to the Brazilian society, it classifies people by color. Therefore, we are all racialized, meaning we're all seen from a race perspective. So when we whites start to hear sentences such as whites are indifferent to racism, we feel upset and even offended because we are not. Some of us, or many of us, we never conceive that the black population, when they hear that the blacks are this and blacks are that, their subjectivity disappears within the collective. So it's important for us, the whites, to understand that we too are part of racial relations. Therefore, generalizing on the way we are and the way we act are so imprecise as those that actually underpin racism. We are all involved in racial classifications, and those classifications are hierarchizing. They are not classifications that assume inequality. Therefore, there's this very important dimension, which is how the black population go through this experience. Whites have no idea of what it is to be walking in the street and somebody cutting across to the other sidewalk because you're a reason for a threat. Like what happened in Rio de Janeiro, they will first shoot and then they'll ask when it comes to black population. So there's this element which was included in research on students who had this or that result in the classroom, low results because they were black. In blind tests, they had similar tests to the white ones because they were not judged by their skin, but by their knowledge. So this is not a simple dimension of Brazil, but we have to start by admitting that as an element that organizes the city so we can fight it and dismantle it. Differently, but similarly, indigenous peoples are subjected to racism because they have chosen a different type of lifestyle rather than our crazy lifestyle, which as Pepe Mujica used to say, we're always trying to pay bills. They said youth should not live to pay bills, but rather to enjoy life. And coming back to the elements brought by Enzo and Cora in their turns, it's important for us to understand that educational investment by the families is something that is done on the basis of this horizon. Will there be an effective gain for the family in maintaining their youth attending secondary education so that they can come out and be a supermarket employee or just a delivery boy or girl? Will that education bring back the return that the middle classes enjoy? So in closing, I'd like to put forth the following. The Brazilian middle class, white middle class, has this view of education which is a result of their condition as heirs. This condition of heirs to an education, is not the same as most of the Brazilian population. So, as Cora and Enzo mentioned, lack of interest for school is something that has this deep existential sense. So, asking, what is this experience going to bring back to me? Is it going to ensure positive insertion to me, into my life? Can we actually answer that? I think Cora provided a very relevant list of the initiatives we need to have at different levels, at the management level, in the school, in the classroom, and our contact with our families, so that we equip ourselves to face those dimensions, which do not take place only at school, but outside, and actually cut across those walls and replicate themselves. So it's important for schools to put up this problem. How are we going to become a place that does not replicate inequalities? Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. As usual, you shed light on some of the important aspects, which is to think about educational models.
Repensar a nossa postura como brancos, como pessoas que vêm de diferentes vivências,
people who come from different backgrounds and generalize to the others that which they think, meaning their own experience. So this is a very important aspect in the context of creating dignified trajectories, as you mentioned before, particularly because we need to produce educational models that are more inclusive. Looking at this aspect of meeting specific educational needs of all children, both boys and girls in this country, and also of this region. So I'll change to my Port Spanish, a mixture between Portuguese and Spanish. So we have this question. To questions brought by our participants through our chat feature. So I'm going to elaborate on this question to help direct the points we want you to elaborate on. The models and the reference at UNICEF Argentina, in partnership with the private sector and the provinces at the subnational levels. There's this very rich experience in terms of educational models that are different from traditional models and which combine technology and models that are based on construction that involves different stakeholders, different players in the more remote regions, in the remote in urban centers as well. So what are the experiences? What are the lessons that you can share with us in terms of this experience that you have developed for such a long time, and what happened with the pandemic, what happened to this context? So what are the lessons that we can learn and look forward in the post-pandemic world?
Gracias, Ítalo. Bien, sí,
thank you,
Ítalo.
Thank you. That gives me the opportunity to share ideas about two of the models that we have developed. Looking at, as I was telling you, to look at this ongoing process, which is looking at ensuring secondary education to all children in our country. Secondary education is mandatory by law since 2006, and the different policies and different initiatives have been put in place in order to achieve that, because on the one hand, there was no secondary education, and we have pushed that in the northern provinces, which are provinces that have high levels of poverty, an important numbers of children who live in isolated contexts where there are no secondary schools. And the primary school has improved recently, but if they wanted to attend secondary education, they'd have to move to other sites in order to have that kind of education. Now, looking at this context of technology-mediated primary and secondary education, which was looking at this innovative model in 2012 when we started this cooperation with the North, which is based on a central school organization based on the capital city of the province that would enable arrival to the different remote rural communities by means of this work that was mediated by an educational platform, which means by means of connectivity, those schools, this ensemble of teachers who would be able to attend to the institution in the capital city, they would be able to connect with the schools which were located in rural areas. They were dispersed across the territory. So, by means of this coordinator, which was a teacher, would provide a dynamic element to this multi-age group, and that would allow for exchange with the different teachers teaching different subjects at different levels. So, in the province of Chaco, we achieved 10 different school communities, and it's currently operating in 6 regions, reaching out to 6,000 children having access to their school community by means of the use of various types of technology. This was obviously an initiative that started back in 2012, and it escalated in order to reach this broader need. We know that there are more than 65,000 children living in those remote areas to whom this educational model would ensure schools would reach their communities. Also, another initiative that I'd like to mention that was developed in the year 2017, pre-pandemic, obviously, but we were looking at ensuring innovative models that will allow to tend to the specific needs of those children and their place of residence. Particularly, we have this program called Planea, which is planning a new school to children and adolescents. So the idea was to accelerate the process of transformation with the traditional secondary education. The proposal involved various levels of intervention, as I was telling you before, so we can work with the provincial secondary school structure, reaching out to 100 schools that were located on marginal urban contexts, reaching out to more than 20,000 children with the first cycle of secondary education. With this proposal that actually helped change the focus in 6 areas: mathematics, languages, social sciences, and in this area we promoted joint work between history and geography and also natural sciences. We promoted interdisciplinary efforts involving biology, physics, and chemistry, changing the content of what technology was all about traditionally, using different applications, being able to generate curriculum that will address digital education since the very first year, and will advance into developing knowledge about the different sciences and computer sciences as well, in another space which was built together, which was designed with the provincial management process, which is learning to know. We have been talking about the need to generate these skills, to develop those skills which were not developed before in our students, having access to these tools that will allow us to learn throughout the school trajectory. We have set aside time to work with all of the students from the very first year all the way to the end of the first cycle of secondary education, so that they can take ownership of those tools that will allow them to develop their skills in all areas and to develop progressive autonomy and to develop critical thinking, to develop teaching and educational strategies. And I was saying, this model also addresses this dimension, which has to do with promoting well-being to adolescents in school by generating space and areas for participation, to develop and design projects that will allow to achieve results posed by every group. And also this component, which is looking at developing the well-being of the teaching staff of a school. And a school where we have this institutional effort that will allow for an overall look on the process of education in our schools. We say sometimes that math teachers give a grade to the student, and that evaluates the student in that class mathematics school, and students have different reasons. They have different achievement levels in the different lessons, like a school, history or languages. So keeping track of student trajectory is unique for each of those students in each subject. This is also a bit of the efforts in this program, which is to generate these space for work amongst peers, to generate and share a vision of this institutional work, which is in Argentina a model. As you know, it is working with the students. That is time that involves different institutional level, and it's important to form those bonds amongst the different students. So finally, this program also involves this effort to develop materials that will help modernize the work that is based on teaching through projects. So we develop materials that will keep track of every single year in the first cycle in those 6 subjects that I was mentioning, materials that will integrate a single work proposal through a question, which has to do with the issue of quality and in connection to the contemporary world of the teenagers, addressing education and addressing access to developing critical skills that are established and are critical in the course of the first cycle of secondary education, which are also integrated as one way to evaluate. We refer to it as a formative evaluation, which allow for different achievements and this trajectory proposed by each of those projects, and also help teachers develop this outlook, which is not focused on grades, but rather on the capacity that children have to take ownership of the wealth of skills. So that's the effort we have made in order to put together those important indicators of school trajectory in reducing dropout rates, children who fall out of school before they conclude their secondary education, based on data provided by the Ministry of Education, and also lessons learned through the pandemic, which help provide more information about the context. That is the network efforts across schools. So we see the needs to work with peers to try and build contextualized solutions based on the guidance of experts and based on the best practices of what works, and also based on conversations which are focused on each of the contexts, so that we can advance with those processes together. This is a very important element, which may be a pathway of work that will help us keep track of the process that's being developed across the schools. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Cora.
Thank you very much, Cora.
Vuelvo al portugués.
I'm going to go back to Portuguese now. To those who are watching us today, just as the experience that was mentioned by Cora now, we will have on the next days of the seminar a series of experiences developed in Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Paraguay, which are very rich and may bring lots of contributions to face the challenge that we have, which is to have good school trajectories. I have some questions, and now I'm going to my Spanglish again.
Y a mí me gustaría como que tomar una cuestión
I would like to have a question from a person that is taking part in the seminar. And the question is for Enzo. In your talk, you mentioned in principle and mainly about the need to protect the trajectories of the girls and boys at schools and also to protect their learning. We are also immersed in the culture of parametricized evaluations, evaluation based on parameters. I think this is an issue common to all of Latin America. We have national systems of evaluation, some of them are bigger in terms of people who participate in it, but sometimes we want to develop models which are more children-centered. We need evaluation systems that can provide answers or responses or assess the interventions that we're promoting in the classes, teachers, schools, and so forth. And it will have effects globally, I mean, Latin America and the Caribbean, in the development of competencies, in the educational process, especially in the secondary educational system. Secondary level of educational system, but in education overall. What processes do we need in our region to ensure so that we'll have formative evaluation systems, as Cora mentioned, so that we can have models able or that can be used by the teachers in classes, models that are more flexible, more adaptable to the needs and to the process of competence development, which is so much needed in the basic education system.
Sí, muchas gracias, Ítalo. Efectivamente,
thank you, Ítalo.
Como ya se dijo en este panel,
as I mentioned previously in the panel, the COVID-19 is a crisis for learning, for school, but also an opportunity that we have to reinvent education, especially the secondary education, but all levels really. And to reinvent education means to reinvent assessment of learning. And to do assessments that are part of the formation, that give more importance to what has been learned, but not just that, but think of a suite of abilities that go beyond the regular suite of abilities. I draw your attention to two initiatives we have implemented here. One is very much related to the distance education process. And the last year of middle school we have implemented. The one is prior to the crisis, but it has lots of implications post-COVID. The first was a publication we made on our regional office. It was an initiative that tackled distance learning. Last year, we have closed, at the closing of the schools, all the world was very much concerned with children to have distance learning classes, but to ensure
se descuida un
access,
poco el tema del aprendizaje, ¿no?
the
Entonces,
learning
elaboramos
process
esta
was
guía
somewhat disregarded.
que tiene como objetivo apoyar a los
The objective
docentes por un lado y a los
is
ministerios de educación por el otro, los
to
tomadores de
support
decisiones,
schools, but
en
also
cómo
the
medir
decision
el
makers and the
aprendizaje en contexto
ministries
de
for
educación a
education,
distancia, dependiendo de
how to
si esa
do
educación a distancia
distance
se da
education
a través de entrega de
depending on
material o
how
por radio
it is
televisión
carried
o a
out.
través de
It
medios
can be
digitales con
radio
estrategias
diffusion,
diferenciadas.
TV, broadcasting, it can be the
Que
delivery of
esperamos
material,
pueda ser
it can be
nuestro
online.
aporte en el cortísimo
So
plazo
this can be
en
our contribution in the
pensar
very
en una
short
evaluación de
term
aprendizaje que
in thinking
permita
of an
ajustar esas
assessment of
estrategias
learning
que
that allows us to adjust the
esperamos
strategies.
vayan a continuar
We hope
quizás en una
this
en
will
un,
continue
bajo un sistema híbrido y no
and
100% a
maybe a
distancia,
hybrid system, not
pero esperamos
100%
que vayan a
distant
continuar por lo
learning,
menos los próximos
but
meses.
it will continue for at least the next months.
Pero más allá de la medición de los
beyond
aprendizajes, nosotros,
measuring
tanto a nivel
what has
global como a
been
nivel
learned
regional, UNICEF
at
se ha hecho
global
el
and
control de una
regional
reflexión
level,
alrededor de
UNICEF
cuáles son las habilidades necesarias
has put the
para
question,
que
what
los
are
niños,
the
niñas y
skills
adolescentes
needed
se desarrollen
for
plenamente
teenagers
como
to fully develop
ciudadanos
as
activos y
active
productivos
and
en el contexto
productive
del siglo
citizens
XXI, ¿no?
in the context
Y
of the
hablamos de
21st
un
century.
conjunto de
And we
habilidades
talked
que
about a suite of abilities
necesitan desarrollarse tanto en la
that
educación
have to be
formal,
developed
pero también a
both
través
in the
de
formal
iniciativas de
educational
educación
system,
no
but
formal
also
e
in the
informal.
non-formal or
Y estas
informal
habilidades
education
incluyen
initiatives.
las
These
habilidades
abilities
fundamentales,
are the
evidentemente, lectura, escritura y
paramount.
matemática,
It's
pero también las
read,
habilidades
write, and
digitales, y
mathematics,
hemos visto
but
la
also
importancia de esto a
digital
lo largo de los del
skills,
último año.
and we've seen how important that can
Las
be.
habilidades transferibles, que son las habilidades para la
Transferable
vida, las
skills,
habilidades del siglo XXI, ¿no? Los de
which is the
pensamiento
abilities
crítico, de
of critical
creatividad, de
thought,
respeto a la diversidad,
creativity, respect to
y también
diversity,
las habilidades específicas para el
and the
trabajo.
specific abilities
El
for work.
conjunto de esas habilidades
The
va
joint
a
suite of
permitir
these
que los niños y
abilities
adolescentes sean
will
más
allow
resilientes y que permitan
teenagers
adaptarse
to be
y
more
salir
resilient,
de la
will
escuela
allow them to leave
pudiendo
school
integrarse en
capable
un
of
contexto
integrating
social y laboral que
to
es un
a
contexto que
social
cambia
and labor
rápidamente, ¿no?
context
Y al
that
que es necesario
changes
adaptarse.
so quickly, and they will be able to
Desarrollar, ahí
adapt,
entra en juego
to develop.
la necesidad de
So the need
reimaginar la
to
educación en el
reinvent
sentido de que esta
education in the
educación tiene
sense
que
that
permitir a
this
los estudiantes
education has
aprender
to allow
y
students
dominar
to
esas
learn
habilidades para que
and
puedan
to
egresar y continuar
fully
su trayectoria de desarrollo de la mejor manera
develop
posible.
these
Pero también
skills, to
significa
continue their
buscar
development the best way
maneras
possible. But
para
ways
medir esas
have to be
habilidades, ¿no?
pursued
Necesitamos
in order to
también
measure those abilities.
medir qué tanto los estudiantes están
We have to
desarrollando esas
measure
habilidades para
what
poder
skills
otra
they're
vez implementar
developing
medidas correctivas y poder
so as to
ajustar
implement
las
corrective
estrategias.
measures and adjust our
Como UNICEF
strategies.
hemos elaborado
As UNICEF, we have
un modelo para
elaborated
la
a
evaluación
model
de un conjunto de
for the
habilidades que está
assessment
incluido en un
of a
marco
suite of
conceptual que hemos
abilities
elaborado que se
included
ha
in the conceptual
implementado de manera piloto
mark.
Timor
This was
Leste y que
implemented
esperamos
in
poder
a pilot way
implementar
in
en uno de los
East
países de América
Timor,
Latina en el transcurso
and
del
we
próximo
expect to
año
implement it
para
in Latin
que
America
podamos
in
ofrecer
the
a
beginning
los
of next
ministerios de
year,
educación
in
una
order to
herramienta
offer the
más
ministries
allá
of
de la reflexión
education,
teórica y conceptual, una
which
herramienta que
goes
permita
beyond
medir
theoretical
el desarrollo de habilidades
reflections and
y
thoughts,
hacer que los
something
sistemas
that may
educativos
allow us
sean
to
cada vez
measure
más pertinentes, más de
skills
calidad
developed
y que esa pertinencia y
that is
calidad
more
sea
pertinent
percibida
and has
por los
more
mismos
quality.
estudiantes
And this may be
y,
perceived by the
y
students
que
as
les
such,
permita continuar
allowing
sus
them
trayectorias
to
educativas y
continue their
escolares no
educative and
solamente
school
porque
trajectories,
tienen que hacerlo, sino
not
porque
just because they
realmente
have to do it,
encuentran en la
but
escuela
because they will
el
see
valor
in
agregado
school
que les va a servir
added
para su
value
desarrollo y
that
para
will
desarrollarse en su máximo
will
potencial.
contribute for their development and for them to achieve their greatest potential.
Muchísimas gracias, Enzo. Tenemos,
Thank you very
bueno,
much,
al
Enzo.
final tenemos muchas
Well, at the
preguntas de
end, we'll
nuestros
have many questions
participantes,
from our
entonces les voy a hacer
participants.
como
So
que
let me
un conjunto de preguntas porque
let
estamos
me ask a suite
muy
of questions
allá del
because
tiempo
we are already getting to the end of our allotted time.
Para que podamos que puedan, bueno, hablar ahora un poquito más corto.
So the idea is to provide shorter
tiempo
answers now, given the time,
despedirse de nuestro
and also
panel,
to
¿okay? Me voy a hacer la traducción
say
para mi
goodbye
portuñol. André, creo
to
que
the panel.
comprendas mi portuñol. Entonces
I'm going to speak
como,
in Spanish,
hay una pregunta muy
so
específica acerca
you may understand. There's this very specific
tanto de la
question
cuestión de la inclusión de los
about
estudiantes
inclusion
migrantes, que tenemos
of
un
migrant students.
sea con la crisis
with
de
this
migración
huge
de
crisis,
venezolanos para la
we have lots
región
of
de Latinoamérica, pero
Venezuelans
también hay
migrating to
migrantes
the
de
rest of
otros
Latin
países
America, but we have
llegan a
migrants from other countries
Latinoamérica,
that get
no
to Latin
solamente
America, not just
de América del Sur, pero
from
también
South America, but
de otros continentes.
also from other continents.
Esa es una pregunta que hicieron, ¿cómo incluirlos para que tengan sus trayectorias dignas en las
How to
escuelas?
include them so they
Esta
have
es una pregunta.
dignified trajectories in schools. That's one question.
De la cultura de repetencia, de
And
la
the reality
del retraso escolar
of the culture
en los países de Latinoamérica.
of
Es una
schooling
otra
in Latin
pregunta,
America,
que se puede,
talking about
que
grade
se puede
repetition
pensar,
or grade
además, para allá
failure. Something to
los
think
procesos,
about
de las mediciones
beyond
de
measuring
aprendizaje que los
process
docentes
on
están ahí,
how much students have learned.
que están ahí, pueden decirnos. Y por último,
And lastly,
una otra pregunta acerca de el
question about
planeamiento de los próximos 3
the
años
planning for the next 3
en
years
los países, en el contexto de un mundo
in these
post
countries, in the
COVID-19,
context of the
post pandemia de
post-COVID-19.
COVID-19. Entonces, ¿qué podemos pensar? ¿Qué podemos pensar
What can we
en el
envision
planeamiento de
or
los
suggest
próximos
for the
3
planning
años?
of the next 3
Entonces, por
years?
favor, sean más directos
Now,
y
please
cortos
be
en sus respuestas
more
y
direct
les pido
and
que
provide shorter
les pidan
answers, and please,
de los
you
participantes del
may
seminario de hoy.
also
Empiezo yo.
Sí, por favor.
Gracias. Bom, então queria primeiro agradecer a companhia
first, I'd
honrosa
like to thank the honorable company of Cora and
foi
of
muito bom
Enzo.
ouvi-los.
It was very good
Enzo
to
tinha
hear you.
interesse em conhecer as
Enzo, I'd like to
publicações,
know
se
about
puder
these publications, if you
disponibilizá-las.
can make them
Acho que
available.
isso será importante para
I
nós
think
todos
it
aqui
will
no
be
Brasil.
important for us in
É uma
Brazil
contribuição
to have access to them. Very important
Para ser
contribution.
bem curto, assim,
Be very
Ítalo,
short.
eu acho que tínhamos que lembrar uma coisa: a educação é um campo de
We
disputa
have to recall
política
something.
muito intenso.
Education is a very
Ela não é
politically
terreno em
intense
que os acordos se
dispute
constroem com
field.
facilidade.
It's not a field
Ela é
agreements are
terreno de
reached
intensas
easily.
disputas de
It's
sentido da
a
educação.
terrain of intense
Então, eu
disputes.
vejo que hoje
Why
essas
educate?
avaliações em
Intention
larga
for
escala
education.
contribuem para
These
uma visão
large-scale
hierárquica da
evaluation
educação e não uma
contribute
visão que
for a
valoriza a
hierarchical
diversidade da
view
educação.
of education, not
Porque
something that
essas
will
questões,
contribute
essas
for
provas
the
têm toda uma técnica
diverse
muito
view of
sofisticada de
education.
elaboração
All
e
these
avaliação, mas
assessment
elas são referenciadas
schemes
culturalmente no
are
mundo todo.
culturally referenced to
Portanto,
the
no caso
urban world.
brasileiro, elas
In
já
the Brazilian
excluem
case, they
previamente
previously
em torno de
exclude
15%
around
dos estudantes que
15%
vivem no campo.
of students that live in the
Então,
field.
eu contribuí, participei do debate
I
da
contributed.
criação
I was
desses
part of the
indicadores no Brasil, do
debate
IDEB,
of the
tenho
creation of these
orgulho
indicators
disso,
in Brazil. I'm proud
mas
of it.
acho que nós não podemos
However, I think
tratá-los
we
como
cannot treat them
termômetro
as a
preciso o
precise
suficiente que
enough
garanta.
thermometer.
Inclusive, hoje, há uma expressão que eu gostaria
Today,
aqui
there's
de
an
aproveitar a
expression
oportunidade
I would
de
like to take the
contestar com muita
opportunity to
firmeza e
oppose
companheirismo.
very
Tenho
firmly
ouvido falar
and
da ideia de uma geração
very friendly.
perdida
So
pelo
I have
Covid-19.
heard about a
Acho
lost
equívoco
generation
porque
of
todos
COVID-19. I
aprendemos
think
sempre.
that's
Todos aprendemos
not
sempre.
right
E
because
quanto
we
mais
all learn
difíceis
all
as
the time.
situações,
And
mais
the
somos
harder the
obrigados a
situation,
aprender.
the more we have to learn.
Se essas aprendizagens
Now,
são
if this
facultáveis,
learning
analisadas ou
can be
valorizadas
analyzed or valued
escolarmente, é
in
debate
school,
necessário.
that's a necessary
Mas nós não
debate we
podemos
have to carry
negar
out.
que
But
essa
we cannot
geração,
deny
essa geração que
that this
enfrenta a
generation that
já
faces
deu
COVID
demonstrações
has
intensas de
shown
solidariedade, de
intensely
mobilização,
their
de trabalho.
solidarity, their
Eu queria, por
mobilization,
fim,
their
deixar
capability to
comentário
work.
sobre
And a comment
possível, provável e
about a
desejável
possible,
retorno às
probable,
escolas.
and desirable return to
Com
school
as condições de segurança,
with
precisamos cuidar de quem
necessary
cuida, a vacinação, mas eu queria deixar
care. We have to
um
care
tema que eu acho
of the
importante.
caretakers, of the teachers with
Talvez os nossos
vaccination.
estudantes
But
de
maybe
secundária
our secondary
saibam
school
que
students
escola
know
querem, mas
what
talvez não
school
saibam
they
que
want.
educação querem.
They may not know
A
what
escola do
education they
convívio, a
want.
escola do diálogo,
The
a
school
escola do
of
esporte, a
dialogue,
escola da
of
arte,
sport,
a
of
escola da
art, the
cultura,
school of
a escola do
culture, the
pátio
school of
que eles se
the
socializam.
patium where they
Essa escola é
socialize.
fundamental.
That school is
Então,
paramount. That
como
school is
Cora
very important.
comentou,
As Cora
não vamos
mentioned,
inventar a roda,
let's not
vamos
reinvent
ouvir
the
os
wheel.
jovens.
Let's hear the
No
youths.
acolhimento à volta à escola,
And
duas
bringing them back
perguntas.
to school,
O que
two
que ele
questions.
espera que a escola
What
dê
do
a
you
ele?
expect
E o que que ele
school to
espera
give
dar à
you?
escola?
And what do you expect to give to school? contributing, therefore, to the school environment for which all are responsible and to which all have the right. And when there's a racist event, and there will be, we have to act immediately. When there's an exclusion act of LGBT students, an immediate action has to be taken. When there's a gender violence against women, an immediate action has to be taken because youths need a trusted environment for them to learn, especially in adverse conditions such as the ones going through. I liked this meeting very much. I congratulate UNICEF. I thank for being part of such a rich and intense and live dialogue. And I wish all the educators to do what we said here. Let's look at our children and let's try to talk with them first, not prioritarily with a huge volume of bureaucratic obligations that do not necessarily contribute at the moment for a tender dialogue that we have to have so that all may be part of this common challenge that we have, which is to produce an inclusive school. Thanks, Andrea. Cora.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Voy a hacer algunas
Thank you very much.
finales cortitas.
I'm going to have some final short reflections because lots of things have been very well said. In terms of the major challenges or what agenda is about to come, well, we have to be based on the principle of equity. The data we have only shows how inequalities have deepened. And this equality thing has to be a priority in the creation of policies that will allow us to bring more and better opportunities for our children to learn, especially for the ones who live in more vulnerable contexts, and especially for the ones who want to do different things that may be against the culture in their region. Everybody goes to the same school to get the same results. It's very evident that everybody who does the same just keeps the situation, the status quo. Also, we have to develop not just the content, but the development of skills and to integrate teenagers now. It is a moment of a lot of creativity, of a lot of positivity that has to be followed up with the promotion of greater access to health system, better follow-up on them. They have to be protected. We have to talk about suicide, depression. These figures are intolerable in our region. One of the pillars also needed is to work intersectorially and to promote this articulation between the many sectors in the government and to open the game to other players in order to ensure the necessary resources to do quality school. When we talk about the 21st century school, it has to be a connected school, allowing the children to develop the digital abilities which are needed today so that they can be part of the digital world, one that goes through every productive process in society. We want to ensure planning and money enough to implement that kind of thing. And lastly, a message for all the players, for the decision makers, take courage because we have to change directives and guidelines and bills. We have to change the way we organize our work of the teachers. We have to follow up on the teachers and we have to support them. And we invite them to take courage, to inspire themselves in good practices and in thinking about good policies and suggest them so as to illuminate, to lighten the measures that may work and may bring new ways to bring innovation about. And to the children, take courage and be participative. Let's build a secondary schooling system that will contribute to your future, and let's promote the full participation of the children so that they may build with adults a school that is good for all. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be part of the panel with Italo, with Andreas, with Enzo. In chat, they were talking about these important things with such important participants. It is really a privilege. Thank you very much.
Enzo?
Gracias, Ítalo. Pues yo
Thanks,
suscribo
Italo.
y secundo
I
el 100%
endorse
lo que dijeron André
everything Andre
Cora.
and Cora have
Solamente
said.
quisiera agregar respecto al tema de migrantes
I'd
y
just like to
refugiados, que me
add
parece un
the
tema
part of immigrants
extremadamente
and
relevante para
refugees, which
nuestra
is
región.
extremely relevant
Yo
for our
creo que el
region.
camino para
I
allá
think
va
the
hacia
pathway
fortalecer y
is to
simplificar
strengthen
los
and
mecanismos
simplify
para
the
reconocimiento,
mechanisms to
validación y
acknowledge,
certificación de
validate, and
aprendizajes
certificate
que
previous
permitan a
learning that they
los y
had,
las migrantes y refugiados integrarse a los
that
sistemas educativos en
immigrants
los
or
países de
migrants
tránsito
and
y de
refugees
destino.
have in the
La
transit and
tecnología del
destination countries.
blockchain ofrece
The blockchain technology
muchas oportunidades
offers
para
lots of
que
opportunities
algo para pensar en algo que sea rápido, que
to
sea
do
ligero,
something
que
that
sea
is
efectivo, sobre
quick,
todo para el derecho a la educación.
fast, and effective.
Creo que podemos explorar
I
ese
think we
camino.
can
Se
exploit
necesita voluntad
that
política,
path.
sí,
We need
pero
political will, yes, we
también,
do.
como decía Cora,
But
se
also, as
necesitan
Cora
también tomar
mentioned,
decisiones
we need to take decisions,
importantes para
important
enfrentar los
decisions,
desafíos que
big
enfrentamos.
decisions to
Y
face the
finalmente,
challenges
respecto a lo que
that we are
viene,
facing
yo
now.
creo que uno de los desafíos grandes en el
I
corto
think one of
plazo de
the
los sistemas
great
educativos va a
challenges on the
ser
short term for the
lo de la
educational systems
medición
is
de
to
las pérdidas de aprendizaje
measure
como
the
resultado del
loss
cierre
of
progresivo de las
learning
escuelas
with
y la puesta en marcha de iniciativas
the
que permitan
pandemic
compensar
influence.
esa pérdida de aprendizaje
And what
y
can we do
evitar
to
que la crisis
compensate
de
the
salud
loss
del
of
COVID
learning?
no se vuelva también
And
una
we have
crisis de
to avoid
aprendizaje
the
encima de la crisis de aprendizaje
COVID
que ya
crisis
vivíamos.
not to become
Y
also a learning
finalmente,
crisis.
creo que podemos
Lastly, I think we should,
aprovechar la
must,
promesa
to
ofrecida por
take the promise
la educación
offered
digital
by digital
para
education
otra vez tomar decisiones muy
to
decididas hacia el
once
cierre de
again
la brecha
take
digital
firm
para permitir
decision
que todos los
to
niños y niñas y adolescentes, independientemente de su
diminish
procedencia
the digital
geográfica o
gap
de
so
su
that
background
all the
cultural,
children,
puedan
regardless
tener
of their
acceso a soluciones de
geographical
educación
position
digital
or
en igualdad de
origin, to
oportunidades
have
con los
access
que
to
ya tienen
digital
acceso
education.
y aprovechar eso para
And we have to take
dar un
that
paso hacia
opportunity
adelante en el
to
logro de los
step
desiguales.
ahead
Me
in
uno
diminishing
al agradecimiento por la
inequalities.
invitación. Ha sido
I
un
once
panel de
again
lujo.
thank
Estoy
you
muy agradecido
for
de
the
poder
invitation. It's been
estar
a
aquí
great panel.
y
It's a
espero
privilege
poder
and a pleasure to be
participar
here.
activamente.
I
Voy a
hope
participar activamente en las discusiones de los próximos
I'll
días, que seguramente
participate
van a estar
actively in the discussion
igualmente
that
muy
will
buenas y muy
ensue
profundas.
in the next days,
Muchas
which will
gracias.
be as deep as this one, I think. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Enzo. Muito obrigado, Cora. Muito obrigado, André. A construção de trajetórias de sucesso escolar requer esforço hercúleo de muitos atores nesse trabalho, aprofundamento claro dos desafios que estão envolvidos nessa construção e também esforço necessário
involved in this construction, and also this effort of having different stakeholders cooperate, bringing experiences which are so richly available in our countries, in Brazil and in the other Latin American countries. So I'd like to thank you again for participating in this seminar. We have not finished yet. I am going to invite again, and also sharing my words of gratefulness to Enzo, Cora, and Andre. I will call our host back to the stage, Sidney Vasconcelos, who is going to be presenting the closure moments of this first opening day. On behalf of UNICEF Brasil's education team, I would like to thank you all for participating, and I wish you a good evening. But please do not miss this very last moment of our first day, which is going to be very, very fruitful. Thanks for your mediation, which was ever so generous.
Super obrigado, Ítalo, Professor
Thank you, Ítalo, Professor André, Enzo, and Cora. We are really thankful for this panel who has added to the brilliancy of this event and also opened our eyes to see the data behind this reality that we face here in Brazil and in the other Latin American and Caribbean countries. So, expressing my gratitude for this moment of reflection, for this moment when we can think critically about what we have in terms of be enhanced by what we see in the chat feature of this event, because it shows how much interaction there has been, because it proves how all of those dimensions that contribute to successful school pathways, that also contribute to this appearance of this school failure phenomenon, and that helps us be more participatory in this process of developing an educational culture. As Italo said before, we have this cultural presentation to share with you. So we went all the way to Mato Grosso do Sul in order to bring to you this cultural presentation, which is pioneer in Brazil. And for more than a decade, they have been speaking about ancestrality. They've been talking about the rights to the land, and they're talking about rights by means of this group of indigenous youth. So after a few messages I need to share with you, we will get in touch with their art and their music. So in this moment when we will be closing our first day in a very joyful note, I'd like to share some of the messages referring to this first day and to the upcoming 2 days. We will continue transmitting this encounter by means of 4 different links. So through YouTube, you will have 4 different links. One in Portuguese with audio description. Also another transmission with the Brazilian Libras, Brazilian Sign Language. Another one in English, another one in Spanish. During transmission, I saw that some people did not know exactly which link to use. So, in the next 2 days, when you come to YouTube, UNICEF Brazil's YouTube channel, you will see the language and the transmission type. That will make it easier for all of our guests to find the best way to watch and participate in the discussions. The next message I'd like to share with you is all of this content is going to be recorded and available by means of UNICEF Brazil's channel on YouTube. So as soon as we finish today's meeting, you will be able to share these links with those people to whom you think this content is interesting. And also tomorrow, which will include other links. So please look for the specific links for the language you choose. Transmission is going to be the same way tomorrow and Thursday. We're going to have 2 workshops on each day. And in these workshops, we will be able to share practices and experiences, not only for Brazil, but from other countries. And we will have this opportunity to get to know more of what is happening at the local level and at the regional level together with you. It's going to be another opportunity for rich exchange of experiences. So I'd like to invite for a quick chat with us and to add to this encounter, I would like to invite Bro MCs, which is a group from the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. We will have everybody on the screen very soon. Good afternoon. Hello. How are you? We are very happy to have you here. Do we have the 4 group members or only 2? Only 2. These 2 group members are certainly going to represent the entire group. And we will have the pleasure of watching your presentation very soon. But we would like to start by asking a few questions so that you will have the opportunity to share with us the origins of the Bro MCs group. So how was the group created and which role did you play? We know the group comes from Mato Grosso do Sul. We know the group is composed by 4 indigenous youth. We would like to know where the idea came from and what role do you play in the group. And there are other questions in our chat box to be asked to you. So when you feel comfortable, if you can start by answering those questions, we will then open up to the other questions. Welcome once again, and thanks for participating. So, the Bro MCs group, before it was Bro MCs, I was a member who was already doing rap music in my native language. So before Bro MCs. So it all started with me. I used to see the situation of my people. I saw the difficulties they were going through in my community, in my village. And all of that led me to do rap, mixed rap, which is so-called Guarani rap. Since I was 8 years old, I started to be introduced to rap by means of this program called Ritmos na Batida, Beat Rhythms. It was an FM program, so we had the opportunity to start listening to that. And both the beat and the lyrics had me thinking about the situation of my people, because nobody spoke on our behalf. Nobody spoke on behalf of the Guarani Kaiowá community. You would look into the internet and you wouldn't find anything. So this is one of the things that actually led me to create my own words in order to report the situation my community lives and experiences. And that is how I started my trajectory in rap, making presentations in schools, the schools in my community. I would make gigs to teachers, for instance, where I shared the reality my communities experienced, so that they could see that there is a different movement. There was a different movement going on in the Barueri Jaguapiru village. So in this trajectory, I came across these partners who took an interest on the work I was doing, the work of showing what happens. And I saw I was not alone. I was not the only one who had different thoughts about it. And we were thus able to put everything together. Myself, Calvin, Charles, and Clemerson. So we started to add together, with no thoughts of getting as far as we did, where we are today. Because we were making presentations in schools, and that's where I expected to stay. We had this dream of singing and showing to our community, to show to those children we have in our communities, to show that indigenous people can do something different. We never thought we would get this far. You see? Yeah, he said it all.
Valeu, Bruno. Valeu, Kelvin.
Very good, Bruno. Very good, Kelvin. It is indeed great to get to know this initial experience of this first indigenous rap group in Brazil, which has been transforming an entire generation and many lives. With that in mind, I would like to ask you another question to help us learn what you prepared in terms of this cultural presentation. My question is, how has music, art, education really defined your trajectory? What is the importance of every rehearsal? What was the importance of the workshops you took part in, music, art, and culture? What's the importance of all that in terms of the opportunities Bro MC's 4 members were capable of redefining your individual trajectories? and the group's trajectories. Well, I think it was something like a stairway for us, indigenous people. I think each lesson we had, both in school and the workshops, so it is more knowledge for us, but it's also something like this stairway, which helped us increase the knowledge we had about hip-hop. We had workshops here in the village, so every bit of knowledge we acquired is actually contributed to what we are today. But before that, we already had knowledge about rap. But we had further action when we went through the first workshops. Every rehearsal we had, we were focused on our people, as Bruno just said. In our village, there was no voice that was enough. In more remote times, we had it, but those voices were shut. So there was no representative who could reach out to so many people. So each practice we had has been very important for us, because it has brought about results, which allowed us to show stuff to the public from the stage, to increase their knowledge about the indigenous people. Who are they? How do they live as indigenous people? What is the life like? What is life like in the villages? What is the language that is spoken? So that is knowledge that we share with the people who watch us. So when we have any rehearsal practice, we're thinking about sharing the reality, the Guarani Kaiowá experience, and sharing that with the other people who watch us. This is good. Am I on the screen again? Yes, okay, so this was very good, Bruno, and I want to keep listening to you, because it is important to see how music, how art is transforming, and it helps redefine trajectories. This is what we have been talking about since the beginning of this week, and today we will show that through a fact, actually. And the last question I'd like to have is related with the song that you chose for this cultural presentation. Ejuerandue is the name of the song. That was the first indigenous rap to be created and released here in Brazil. So what does the song talk about? What are the lyrics about? What was the message you wanted to share? Having rap as an instrument for social criticism, being able to empower people on all of those issues that were shared by our panelists before us, which is something that you bring in a dense manner through the group's production. So what are the focus, so which are the approaches that you want to share through your rap, so that you can actually overcome those challenges to ensure those rights? So we would like to understand how this, the lyrics of yours help in that concern through this song that we're going to be listening in a few minutes. Jorandie is the name of the song again, and we made this song in order to invite all of those who fight for the indigenous peoples. I believe it's not only for the indigenous peoples, but for the middle classes who fight for the rights. Ejuerandie is a song that calls upon those people as if it was a war cry, a cry of war. Ejuerandie. It means come with us in this battle so that one day we can get where we want to go, so that we have an objective that we will achieve, which involves being able to show that indigenous people, low-income people, people who live in the peripheries, people who live in the streets, so that they feel as they have an objective that will take them where they want to go, so that children develop these thoughts, being able to say, I'm listening to this song, but I too want to be a fighter myself, fighting for indigenous issues, but also for general issues involving rights, being able to show what our reality is all about, stuff that the media never shows, to show the reality of our children, to show the reality of our elderly people. So this song tells a little bit of each of those stories. The refrain, as if it were a cry of war. Very good, Bruno. Thank you, indeed. This is the space we wanted to dedicate to you, so that we can share this very strong message you share through your rap music, telling us about your everyday lives. And that is something we want to share in the course of these 3 days, to show that dignified trajectories can be assured for every child and every adolescent, looking at the specificities of each people, looking at those dimensions that need to be analyzed when we speak of education. This is why we invited this group, which is indeed a group which shares through their talk, through their art. So, we want to give you more space so that Bro MC's group and other similar artists can actually share the knowledge, going out to schools that will be able to appreciate the expression of those people. So again, we'd like to thank you, those who are watching us through YouTube channel. They are looking forward to listening to that, but I'd like to share a couple of messages before we watch this video. First one, to express our gratitude to UNICEF Brasil's team, particularly education and communication areas, which have contributed to making this seminar for a number of months now, under the leadership of our boss, Ítalo Dutra, who actually helped us conceive the seminar, as well as we would like to thank all of our partners who have contributed to this encounter, this 3-day encounter, looking at civil society partners, as well as partners from the private sector and from the private and state education networks. We would also like to thank the countries that have national offices of the UNICEF, which have contributed to the seminar: Paraguay, Ecuador, Argentina, Colombia, Peru, and I hope I haven't missed any. And if I have missed some, I will certainly have a complete list tomorrow. So I'd like to thank also our regional office for all of the support they have put together for this initiative. And last but not least, we would like to share our solidarity with many of the Brazilian families concerning the big challenge that has been brought by the pandemic to all of us. So we would like to share our solidarity with the more than 400,000 of people who unfortunately lost their lives to COVID-19. And we would like to say that we are sharing our solidarity, but we are also sharing our heartfelt feelings, and how important it is to have policies that will look at every child and every individual to ensure the rights. Today, when we talk about education, we have to think about education and this context, in the wholesome context, because it's not separate from health or from social protection. If we look at every child, where many of those different perspectives are considered, we will be able to ensure full development to all of those children. And our country will therefore be able to overcome this crisis, this public health crisis.
Solidariedade a todas essas famílias.
So our solidarity to all of those families. I would like to invite you all to watch this special presentation that was produced by this group, Bro MCs from Mato Grosso do Sul, which is going to close the first day of our seminar. So we'll see tomorrow at 3 p.m. Brazil time. So once again, I would like to welcome you all to watch this presentation. Thank you, Kelvin and Bruno. Would you like to say any other word before we show your number? No, we would like to thank you. We're truly happy and honored to be here to introduce my people to you, to be able to talk about the Guarani Kaiowá indigenous people. So I'm really very happy to be here, so thank you. Also, if you want to follow us, we are on the social media, Facebook and Instagram, and also on Twitter. So just follow us, Bro MCs, the official group.
Valeu, vamos nessa. Então solta o som aí, pessoal.
Okay, so let's have this video. We will now be able to watch this presentation of Endiuer Endiuer, which is a song composed by Bro MCs.
Então, galera, acho que a educação é importante, né, para o nosso desenvolvimento. Então, a gente viemos da oficina, né, a gente começou na escola, e através disso a gente conseguimos, né, chegar até a gente chegou, e ainda por cima nós somos indígenas rappers, né, então muitas pessoas se espelham em nós, e é isso aí, a educação é super importante. Valeu!
Abe shehepi do pai, abe shehepu nyepuru, adabo por amor é rendu façabo o imenha de jarapope na imenha juka she ajerurenya de jarape o morre de ranguandeira perra xerape da iguai vai pa o hasane acabe o grau dessa maldade da iguai vai pare pensar povo contra povo no catu e mopu ande acá denera sendo de uairinha de jara awe aque onde no panja we chupe she aguarre arrima go rap guarani hakaiwa dendo catu e remanha no xerehe ba eu endere rechai ape rap guarani onguarre berrendo ranguan ara ete orera aron o pego e jurendiwe o pego e juxendiwe jarranha de awe e juxendiwe cheiro renoi e jurendiwe venha com nós nessa levada cheiro renoi e jurendiwe aldeia unida mostra a cara cheiro renoi e jurendiwe venha com nós nessa levada cheiro renoi e jurendiwe aldeia unida mostra a cara jarranha de queira de aguatá jarranha de queira de auá jarra de achuca caraipe que che haha e homem entre coporã dere hasanu she pure remanhau aí xerehe hako anga sheme ko ape achuca ba epa ore ro representar hako anga apero ime ape awaqueira oreko osonha hangwa ko anga poranduta dewe ba equipanha de jachuca hanyamano upia ariore ro pura rei awa ojejucara umi caraiqueira opucanha dere rei upia caça chieme ko ape ro defender hangwa upia e juorendiwe cheiro renoi e juorendiwe venha com nós nessa levada cheiro renoi e juorendiwe aldeia unida mostra a cara cheiro renoi e juorendiwe venha com nós nessa levada cheiro renoi e juorendiwe aldeia unida mostra a cara cheiro renoi e
Eduorendiwe, venha com nós nessa levada. Cheiro renoi, Eduorendiwe, aldeia unida mostra a cara. Cheiro renoi, Eduorendiwe, venha com nós nessa levada. Cheiro renoi, Eduorendiwe, aldeia unida mostra a cara. Cheiro renoi, Eduorendiwe, venha com nós nessa levada. Cheiro renoi, Eduorendiwe, aldeia unida mostra a cara. Cheiro renoi, Eduorendiwe, venha com nós nessa levada. Cheiro renoi, Eduorendiwe, aldeia unida mostra a cara.
Valeu.
Seminário Internacional Trajetória de Sucesso Escolar UNICEF, tamo junto.
Isso aí mesmo, é nós mesmo. MCs.
Tupã.
Isso aí. Tem quatro.
Cheiro Tupã. Pro MCs.
Tupã.